Okay, good morning, everyone. The time is 10:01 and the inquiry is now open. My name is Helen Heward and I am the Planning Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this inquiry into an appeal made by Clearstone Energy Limited under Section 78 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990. Can I just check, can everybody hear me?
You might need to bring it forward and just direct it at your...
Okay. Let's try that. Is that better? Okay. Right then. So the screen tells you I'm Helen Heward anyway, so I think you'll have all worked that out. So I'm the Planning Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the inquiry into the appeal made by Clearstone Energy Limited under Section 78 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 against the decision of East Devon District Council to refuse planning permission for a proposed development described as the construction, operation and maintenance of a battery energy storage system with associated infrastructure and works, including highway access, landscaping and biodiversity enhancements at land just south of Hazelhurst, Raymond's Hill, Axminster, Devon. If everybody could ensure that electronic devices, etc., are all switched to silent, this would be a good time to do that now, please. If at any time you stop being able to hear me or to hear other witnesses, please indicate so that I can make arrangements to improve things. And before we go any further, can the local planning authority please explain the evacuation procedures for us?
Yes, so if there is a fire, then leave by the main doors there and head out downstairs to the car park at the front. There will be a test tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. So the alarm will sound for a few seconds or minutes, but we don't need to go anywhere.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder for toilet facilities for everyone.
Toilets are on the ground floor, just by the lifts. There's also a disabled toilet on this floor, also by the lift. If people want to access the Wi-Fi, the password is customer, and hopefully that will work for you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll now take the appearances, and I'm going to take the names for those who wish to speak. First of all, we're going to start with the main parties. It would be helpful if you could make sure that you append lists to your opening submissions with names, qualifications, how people want to be addressed. That helps, please. Right, okay, so can I turn to the appellant, please, Miss Osman-Smith?
Good morning, Madam. As you've identified, my name is Thea Osman-Smith. You should have an appearances sheet on your desk if you look to your right. Sets out who everyone is. So I'm Thea Osman-Smith. I'm a barrister instructed on behalf of the appellant, and I appear together with Tobin Byers, who will give you a wave and indicate who he is as my junior in this matter. We're instructed by Rhys Bradshaw, who sits to my left. He's a director at DLP Planning, and he's going to be giving evidence on planning matters. I have 6 other witnesses, and hopefully they'll indicate as I call out their names to the extent that they're here this morning. Sarah Fletcher is going to be giving evidence on landscape matters. Dave Reynolds is going to be giving evidence on battery contamination. Martin Blunden on battery fire safety. Joshua Rigby on hydrology and controlled water pathways. Alaric Lester on airborne emissions. And Andrew Fellows on contamination. I've also listed there 2 other individuals. They're not going to be giving evidence, but they may participate in the condition session when we get there. There's 2. First of all, Jake Farmer, who's a planner, also at DLP, and James Nicol, who's from Clearstone Energy. He sits on the back row, and he may participate in that session as well.
Marvellous, thank you very much. Sarah Fletcher, how do you wish me to address you? Miss, Mrs?
Ms.
Ms.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You can hear me? Yes. I'm Jack Barber. I'm a barrister from Cornerstone Barristers. I'm representing the local planning authority. I'm instructed by East Devon District Council. To my right is Mr. Andrew Digby, who's a senior planning officer at East Devon District Council. He'll participate in the planning condition session. And then there's Matt Jerry, who's around, who's the appeals officer. He's not going to participate formally, but he's a helpful person for everybody to know for practical matters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barber. Did I catch your name correctly? Mr. Andrew Digby? Thank you very much. And the appeals officer is?
It's Matthew Gerry, Gerry.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Parkinson.
Thank you. Morning, Madam. My name is Andrew Parkinson. I'm a barrister instructed by Richard Buxton Solicitors. I've got a list of appearances which is attached to the opening, which you'll get in a minute. But I'll just run through who we've got. And we've got, first of all, Peter Lever dealing with landscape, there he is, it's behind me. Then we've got Professor Jeremy Ramsden, who's dealing with battery safety. Then Clive Carpenter dealing with hydrology. Kieran Laxon dealing with airborne emissions. And then Elliot Jones, who sits on my right, who is dealing with planning and will also participate in the conditions roundtable session.
Marvellous, thank you all very much. So now if I could look to interested parties, please. If there's anyone here who'd like to say something at the inquiry, I'd like to take your details now, please. We've got some time allocated later this morning for interested parties to speak, although I'm aware we may need a little bit more time. And we'll work out how we'll deal with that. So I shall want to know if you're going to, your name, if you're going to speak for or against, and if you speak as an individual or if you represent someone, please tell me who you represent. If you want me to record any qualifications, then you must also tell me that. I also will want to know whether or not you're agreeable to being asked questions and if you have availability constraints. And if you do speak, then you will be, I'll put your name in the decision letter as well. You can expect for it to appear there. So I think I saw a lady standing up to tell me would you mind awfully using the speaker system? Thank you. We need you to put the mic on. Can I just check? Do we need that for the live streaming as well? Yes. So it isn't just for in the room. It's so that everybody who's watching can hear as well, that we need everybody to use the microphones.
Right.
Okay, carry on. Thank you.
So I'm Karen Goman. I'm also speaking on behalf of Caroline Jamieson, Caroline Jamieson, and Dave and Sophie Burley, who are spelt Burleigh. So do we? Yeah, Karen like Karen, Karen, Goman, Goaman.
And how would you like me to address you? As Miss, Mrs?
Dr. Goman.
Doctor, thank you very much. I'm sorry, Dr. Goman, we haven't got through all my list of questions. Can we have you back? It's unfortunate. You go first, so you're only
sure.
making the mistakes everybody else would make.
Okay.
Do you speak for or against?
I'm against the appeal by developers, yeah.
Are you available for questions when you speak? Are you happy to take questions?
Yeah. Yes.
And are you available just today or other days as well?
I'm available other days. But not everyone speaking is. I know that. There's at least 2 speakers who aren't available, except today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Next, please.
My name's Joanna Gordon. Joanna Gordon. Gordon. I'm speaking for myself. I wasn't so against.
How do you wish me to address you?
Joe, if that's all right.
Okay, and would you be happy to take questions?
I hadn't anticipated questions, and I'm not here for the rest of the inquiry, so I'm going to say probably not.
Okay, it may well be that there aren't any questions that get asked, but it's just helpful to know from people at the beginning if they are prepared to take questions. So don't be unduly worrying.
Okay.
Okay, so today.
Possibly.
Hello, my name's Ali Watson. It's A-L-I Watson, W-A-T-S-O-N.
How would you like me to address you?
Mrs. Watson.
For or against?
I'm against the appeal.
Do you speak just for yourself?
I'm just speaking for myself, yes. Well, and the residents of Dorset, but I'm not representing them, I'm just, yeah.
And would you be happy to take questions?
No.
No. And your availability?
I won't be available apart from
Just today?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Paul Hayward, Hayward, and I'm the elected ward member, one of 3 for Axminster Parish. I'm also the Devon County Councillor for Axminster. And for your records, for the avoidance of doubt, I'm also the Town Clerk to Axminster Town Council, although at this hearing I'll not be speaking on their behalf. They haven't given me any instruction as their employee to speak in that capacity. So it will just be as a East Devon councillor. Thank you.
And can I just check for or against?
Against, madam.
And you would be happy to take questions?
If there are any relevant questions, yes.
And your availability?
I'm attending this morning, but unfortunately due to other work commitments and things, I won't be here tomorrow, but I'll stay here as long as I can today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Councillor Duncan McKinder. I'm the elected ward member for the Yardley ward, which abuts the site of this application. Do you need the spelling of my name? D-U-N-C-A-N M-A-C-K-I-N-D-E-R. for Yarty Ward, Y-A-R-T-Y, which abuts the site of this proposal. I'm
And
speaking to try and represent the views of residents in my ward.
do you speak for or against?
Against?
Will you be happy to take questions?
I will. I'm here today, but gone tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Okay, anyone else who wishes to speak at the tell me at the moment?
I'm the last one, I think. Good morning. My name's Andrew Davis. I'm a local resident. I am against. My availability is sporadic this week. I'd be happy to take questions in writing and respond to them in writing. Oh, and you can call me anything you like, but Andrew would be normal.
Okay, anyone else wish to?
Good morning. I'm Councillor Mo Dodson. I represent the Hockchurch Parish Council.
And would you be happy to take questions, Mr. Dodson?
Yes.
Availability?
Usually. Not every day necessarily, depends.
Okay, all right, but
And I'm
more than
against.
today?
And I'm against.
Yeah. Yes, sorry, I understood you were
took
against.
it for granted.
Okay, but you have more availability than just today?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Is there anyone else? Okay, very good. Thank you all very much for Okay, so when you do speak, please bear in mind that I don't need to hear the same evidence twice. If somebody's already made the point that you were going to make, you don't need to feel obliged to make it again just because you said you wanted to speak. Okay, and I understand that we are being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, and that's live now. So this is enabling people to watch remotely, not participate. Thank you very much. Is anybody in the room intending to otherwise record proceedings? No, thank you very much for that. Perhaps now is an appropriate moment to mention that the PINS customer charter expects that all staff to be treated with courtesy and respect, and warns that rude and abusive behaviour will not be tolerated. So that means that I can require participants to leave an inquiry if they're disruptive, or to return on any such conditions as I may seem determined to be necessary. Having said that, my general experience is that most people are very friendly. So I have one request. Please don't attempt to engage me in conversation outside of sitting times, because that would be inappropriate. I know that it's normally meant out of good intent and trying to just be nice and friendly, but it's not appropriate. So if you could help me with that, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, we had a case management conference back on the 7th of January with representatives of the appellant, the council and the action group. It was held to discuss the procedure. The merits of the case were not discussed, and we have a note of that conference on the council's website. Notification letters about this inquiry, I have seen those. The first notifying interested parties and the second confirming the time and date, and it appears that everybody was aware that we were starting today at 10 a.m. And I've also got information relating to the display of site notices and to whom notification was sent. I also have copies of representations made in response to the appeal notification and the original planning application, all of which will be taken into account in reaching my decision. Can I just check, are the main parties satisfied that they've seen all of the representations? Okay. At the case management conference, the appellant confirmed an updated plan schedule had been submitted, but that no new drawings were proposed. And a table of drawings was submitted by the appellant on the 15th of January. Can I just check, is that the correct list of drawings? Thank you. I was going to just say, are they correctly referred to in the draft planning conditions? But I've already picked up that two of the, I think it's the sweat path drawings. I think we've got SK01 is revision F, not D, and SK02 is revision B, not A. That's correct in this list. When you go to the planning conditions, I think it's not correct. So one thing that I do want to make sure is that by the time we get to landscape this afternoon, that the witnesses are certain that they've looked at the correct drawings for sweat path analysis. Yeah, okay, good. It's probably just small details. Okay, documents and any late evidence. So all evidence should have been provided in advance, but if you are intending to submit anything else now, it's about the best time to mention it to me. Is there anything else that anyone is wanting to hand up this morning? No?
Madam,
Okay, how many of these can we have? Can you, yes, okay. Can you pass on to Miss Osmond-Smith? Okay, would you like to go to the mic and just tell me what's been handed around and by whom?
I'm just handing out a photograph of which pertains to the Dorset side of, which is just across the street from this. So it's a panoramic view of the area of outstanding natural beauty, which is just a few hundred meters from this proposed site, where you see Golden Cap and Charmouth and Lyme Bay and the whole sort of valley, Char Valley, going down to the sea.
Thank you very much. And is this something that you're intending to refer to when you speak?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I just turn to Miss Osmond? Do you have any objections to this?
I don't have any objections. We can deal with it in the evidence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Miss Osmond-Smith, I think you were going to say something.
Yes, I was. Thank you very much. Madam, you sent an email via your case officer in respect of Lesser Horseshoe Bat, and you requested that a position statement be produced on that and agreed with the council. I think that process will be completed today, so just to forewarn you, that's coming.
Marvellous. For the benefit of members of the public, when I was reading through the interested parties' representations, I picked up references to the Lesser Horseshoe Bat, and so I sent a note to the parties asking that I wish to be briefed on that. And Miss Osmond-Smith is telling me that I'm likely to receive the note that I've asked for at some point. Did you say today or tomorrow?
I hope today. Everyone who's involved is in the room, I think, so yes.
Marvellous. I didn't mean to push, I'm just checking because, again, landscape witnesses, when we get to the landscape and ecological management plan, I might have a question related to this issue. Okay? Lovely. Great. That's jumped me ahead a bit. Thank you. And the note, has it been? Will it have been shared with the action group?
It hasn't been yet because we've been discussing it with the council, so we're going to complete that process and then we'll get it to the Rule 6 party as soon as we possibly can.
That's absolutely fine.
Marvellous. Okay, so now I just need to run through a quick resume of the inquiry documents. So for the council, we had 3 putative reasons we started off with reasons for a reason for refusal and a statement of case. And on the 3rd of February 26, I then have an update from the council stating that the council wishes to inform the planning inspector dealing with the above appeal that following a review of the statement of case, the council will not be defending its reason for refusal at the upcoming planning inquiry, and it has agreed that its technical expert will work to produce a statement of common ground with the appellant. And I then have that signed statement of common ground dated the 12th of February between the council and the appellant, and that supersedes the earliest statement of common ground. Is that correct?
That's right. I think it's core document 7. Is that? No, it's not. I thought it was. There was a core document reference which I've not got to hand. 4.7.1. I knew there was a 7 in there somewhere.
Okay, thank you. And then for the appellant, I have proofs and summary proofs. So we have airborne emissions, battery contaminants, battery safety, contamination, hydrology, landscape and planning. Marvellous. Okay, and then I have a list of rebuttals submitted. And for the rebuttals, I have fire rebuttal by Martin Blunden, dealing with 3 witnesses, I think. Yes. Anyway, I have Mr. Blunden's rebuttal. Then secondly, I have a contamination rebuttal. Then I have carpenter rebuttal. Sorry, that's just how it's the PDF is labelled. So, yes, it's the rebuttal to Mr. Carpenter's.
Yeah, from Joshua Rigby. Yeah.
Thank you. Then, fourthly, airborne emissions rebuttal with an appendix. Then I have a rebuttal from Sarah Fletcher to the Rule 6 parties landscape, together with an appendix. And then finally, we have a planning rebuttal. Is that correct? Can I just turn to the Rule 6 party? Have you seen all of those?
Yes, we have, thank you.
And are you happy for me to accept those into the inquiry?
Yes, we are. Thanks.
Marvellous. Very good. Thank you. Okay then, so turning to the Rule 6, the action group, we have for your proofs of evidence and summaries, we have air pollution, battery safety, hydrology, landscape and visual, and planning. Is that correct? Okay, and then your rebuttals. So I have a water rebuttal. I have a rebuttal planning from Elliot Jones. I have a rebuttal on battery safety. And then I have a rebuttal on landscape.
That's right, yes. That's the only other rebuttal, so it must be landscape.
Okay, and Elliot Jones appended there were 4 appendices to that rebuttal. Yes, is that correct? And just turning to the appellant, you're happy you've seen all of those and you're happy for me to accept them into the inquiry. Tick, tick. Okay. Can I just check all of this evidence? Is this available for the public to see? This has all gone into the core documents library.
Yes, ma'am. There's an updated core documents list which I think has been put on your desk by the appeals officer. There's a lot of paper on your desk, I can see. If not, we can get you another copy. I can give you mine. So that's I think updated as of this morning. We can get printed copies for everybody else as well.
Do you want to check what I've just been handed?
Happy with that, but if I could get an updated hard copy, that would be useful.
Yeah, I'll ask the appeals officer to get that provided. In terms of documents available for inspection, there's obviously core documents in physical copy on your desk on either side, and then there's also a collection of core documents for public inspection in the corner of the room on that table over there.
Okay, thank you very much. When we have a break, if someone for the council could take the core documents, could break into those boxes, because I think if I was a member of the public, I'd be a bit nervous about whether I was allowed to open one of those boxes, I think. So that would be helpful. And I've just spotted where my list is. So there you go. You can have yours back. Okay. Right. So I also have a list of proposed draft planning conditions submitted on the 4th of March. Have all the expert witnesses seen the draft planning conditions?
Yes, we have. Thank you.
Okay, so if everyone can keep working on those, if we get time today, I would like to give an initial heads up on some points that have come out of my first reading of the conditions. Nothing to be worrying about, just so that we can make some progress and hopefully keep short the time we need at the end of the inquiry. Okay, so we've touched on the core document library. For the benefit of the members of the public, all of those boxes are on the council's website as well, so you can access the documents there. It's a very user-friendly website link, so you don't have to go to the paper documents, but there are paper documents in the room. Okay, and so as of last Thursday, I was told that the core document library wasn't quite up to date, but it is now. It's fully up to date. Is that right?
I think so. From my conversation with the appeal officer beforehand, there were, I think, 3 errata documents which were provided yesterday, I think it was, which I think we're in the process of uploading at the moment. So I think it's up to date and we're making sure that everything is there.
Okay, those were small corrections to proofs of evidence for the benefit of the public, weren't they? And they were small points, weren't they, that were being corrected?
And just so you're aware, the appeals officer has also identified those errata in the core document list in front of you. So, for example, at 6.4.2, there's the errata of Martin's London. So that it's in the right place, so to speak.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, so one of the points that I'd raised in my note to the parties last week was about core document 9.2. Ms Osmond-Smith, do you want to tell me where we are with that?
Yes, I can. I have produced a note, which I'll give you along with my opening submissions, which addresses the points that you've made. But essentially, what we thought was the best way of approaching that was we uploaded onto, or asked the council to upload onto the core document website a cover sheet for those documents, saying that they would be available at the inquiry. They are available in hard copy for inspection now and have been since this morning. So they'll stay there throughout the duration of the inquiry. Obviously, as with all hard copies, we'd ask parties not to take them out of the room so that everyone can have an opportunity to look at them. But we will monitor that and make sure that there are copies available at all times.
Madam, yes, I was also going to cover it in the opening because I know you asked. I mean, we've seen the documents and we've seen them for some time, so it causes us no difficulty. I suppose there's 2 concerns. Firstly, if they're only available in hard copy, then that limits the availability for people who are watching online, both to see them, but also just to follow along the evidence. I think we would also like some clarity on, we understand the reason they've been provided in hard copy only is because there are some parts which are confidential. And we just want some clarity that that's not going to limit our ability, I don't think it will, in closing or in cross-examination to refer to all parts of the document. If that's the case, and if there's no limit on doing that, we are slightly struggling to understand why they can't just be put on the website. Because confidentiality is going to be broken inevitably by the process of cross-examination, closings, potentially your decision. So given that, it might just make sense to put them all on the website so that everybody can follow along and understand the evidence. So that's where we stand. It doesn't affect us, but given that you asked for our view, that's where we stand.
Ms Osmond-Smith?
Yes, I mean, to be clear, the documents are not owned. That is, what's contained within them are not in the ownership of my client. They've been made available to my client. But there is a difference between having that available here for inspection and putting it online where it can be downloaded and widely distributed. And that's where the commercial sensitivity point comes in. So I'll address you to my submissions in due course, but I don't consider that the Act requires that those documents be made available for inspection online. They have been made available to the parties formally participating at the inquiry. To answer my learned friend's question, no, there's no restriction that we would seek to place on him referring to that document in his examination, in his closing submissions. That's absolutely fine, but we don't have the authority to go essentially behind the manufacturer's intellectual property and say that it should be made available for online use where it could be downloaded and distributed.
Okay, so for now, you're both ready to address me in opening submissions on that. So at least we've got the matter in hand so far. I'll hear the opening submissions, and then, if necessary after that, I'll give a direction as to how we're going to proceed. Okay, right, now the timetable. As George Clooney said in, what was it? Oh, brother, where art thou? We're in a bit of a tight spot, aren't we? Okay. What I don't want us to do is to lose too much time talking about the timetable, because that really wouldn't be assisting us all, would it? First of all, we're going to deal with landscape as a round table this afternoon. Everybody wishes for that, and I've managed to prepare for that. Hopefully when we've done that, we'll have a bit of time to have a quick fly through the conditions so that we know that we're all working on that behind the scenes. I still think the timetable is very, very tight. So what I want to ask you, because I know I've heard some quite strong views about sitting next Thursday. One thing that would help me and that would free up Friday is if we were able to sit next Monday. Not free up, not having to sit, but if we were sitting Friday and then we were also sitting Monday, if we were to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, then I think we're in with a shot of getting there. Miss Osmond-Smith, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam. I think we've had discussions this morning, and it does appear perhaps that the Thursday might be possible. Now, I think it was Mr. Parkinson and Mr. Jones, but they were going to look again at their availability, because I think universally Monday is very difficult. So I'll hand over to Mr. Parkinson.
Thank you, Madam. Yes, that's right. Mr. Jones isn't available on Thursday afternoon and can't be available, but I can deal with the conditions. So that doesn't cause any difficulty. I have existing commitments on the Thursday and some childcare issues, but I think they may be resolvable. So I'm looking into that. I don't want to be the one person that stands in the way of us being able to complete on that day. So I can't say right now, definitely I can do the Thursday, but I think it will be possible. And I'll be able to confirm by the end of the day, hopefully.
Okay, that's very much appreciated. Thank you. That's very good. What about the site visit on Monday? Looking at landscape, looking for landscape people.
So is that next Monday? I would have to look into that, I'm afraid. I wasn't aware that I would be needed, so I'll have to get back to you. Is that okay?
We'll check Ms. Fletcher's availability in her diary and ability to get down here for Monday, but we'll come back to you on that as soon as we can, hopefully.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so with no further ado, let's move on from the timetable. Miss Osmond-Smith.
Madam, yes, forgive me for flagging this up. That still leaves closings to be done. There's obviously alternative solutions to those, and when they might be fit in the timetable, whether we do them in writing or virtually. I think we're all in your hands in respect of that as to what you would prefer.
Okay, thank you. That's a good reminder for that. For the benefit of the public, Ms. Osmond-Smith is raising the fact that we don't actually have timetabled time for closing submissions or for cost applications actually as well. are yet to be determined how we would deal with them. My preference is I always find them better when they are heard in the room. Inevitably, there's always something that's a point that's made or added or changed that a party thinks is important. So I do prefer that, but needs must, we'll see where we are and how we get on, really.
Thank you very much. There are just two further points on the timetable, and that is on Thursday, the 12th of March, that Mr. Carpenter and Mr. Reynolds are going to switch position. All right, yeah. And then just a query about the interested parties after Mr. Bradshaw has come. I wonder if there's any interested parties left over, if they could come before Mr. Bradshaw, so that if anything new is raised, Mr. Bradshaw has an opportunity to address that in his evidence rather than potentially, and I'm sure it's a slim potential, but having to recall Mr. Bradshaw to then respond to questions that have arisen.
Very good point. Right. So with those amendments, so I've got Mr. Carpenter and Mr. Reynolds have swapped morning and afternoon, and we would take the interested parties on Thursday morning. Yeah, okay. Everyone happy with that? Okay, very good.
I think but perhaps there was some confusion in the audience then. Interested parties who want to go this morning, as I understand it, Madam, are going to go this morning. That additional time slot is for anyone who can't make today.
Yes, sorry, I didn't realise that there was some confusion at the back of the room. We are going to get to those people who want to speak when we've gone through a few more items this morning. Sorry, I know it's quite tedious, the procedural matters part, isn't it? But we need to do it. Okay, so moving on. The inquiry is going to follow the procedure rules in the 2000 inquiry procedure rules, generally speaking. So that means when I've concluded my opening remarks, I will invite advocates to make their opening statements. Opening statements are for the benefit of everyone to help us understand the main arguments and set the scene. In this case, I've also asked that the Council makes a statement to explain its position and how it was arrived at. If advocates could please make sure you've got Word, looks like you have, you've got versions of your openings ready for me, that's great. Okay, so after opening statements, we will then hear from the interested parties who've asked to speak today. If you have a statement that you're actually going to write out that's written and you're going to read from it, it can be helpful if you give that to the council so that they can then upload that to the inquiry documents as well, and then I can just listen to you instead of trying to scribble furiously to keep up with what you're saying. We've already touched on questions. When we get to the giving of evidence, we'll normally expect those who give evidence normally expect to answer questions from the opposing advocate, and there may also be some other questions. So this afternoon we're going to start on the expert evidence on the landscape issue. That's the one part that we're going to deal with slightly differently. We're going to deal with that as a round table. So what that means for members of the public is we'll have a session where I will lead with a number of questions, and it will be more informal. It will be a discussion, and I will invite the witnesses for both parties to respond to a number of questions. Aside from that, the rest of the evidence is going to be heard via the formal presentation of evidence. where the witnesses will be called, they will give their evidence in chief, they will then be available for cross-examination by the opposing party, and they may then have some questions put to them in re-examination. There will be an opportunity for questions from interested parties, and I may have questions which I can randomly ask at various times, I'll warn you. Okay, I think that's all we need to touch on with the procedures. Planning conditions, we've touched on there already in circulation. We're going to come back to those later on. At some point in the agenda, we are having a session where we're discussing conditions. This afternoon, hopefully, for many members of the public, we're going to have a whistle-stop tour through the conditions, just for me to give a heads up on some things that I flagged about them. That does not indicate that I have made my mind up, or that if the conditions are amended or changed in response to the issues that I'm raising, that is going to make my mind up about the appeal. Conditions are a necessary part of the work of an inquiry to make sure that in the event that if the appeal were to be allowed, that the necessary planning conditions would be in place to attach to the decision. We don't have any legal agreements on this case, no legal agreements. Okay, so when we've got to the end of all of that, we then will hear the closing submissions, which are going to be next week. And before the inquiry is closed, there is an opportunity for applications for costs to be made. I also am required to remind you that I can initiate award of costs, whether or not any applications have been made. But if I were to do that, that follows a process with the relevant party after the decision is issued. Okay, site visit, you're going to look at whether or not we can accommodate that on Monday. For members of the public, at some point I am going to need to make an accompanied site visit. I have made an unaccompanied site visit to the site and the locality. However, you will have noticed what the weather was like the last couple of days, and I would say, I think it's fair to say that the ability to see up between 0.5 and 1 kilometre for views was significantly compromised. So we will need to deal with any aspects of that on the accompanied site visit that you want to make sure I've seen. For the benefit of members of the public, when I make the site visit, when I go on the site, I need to be accompanied by a representative, both for the appellant and also for the council, the Rule 6 party. If other members of the public wish to attend the site visit, we will make arrangements for that. It is down to the landowner to say who else, aside from me, the council and the Rule 6 or council, can go onto the actual site. But there are other areas in the wider locality that you may wish for me to look at. Now, if there are a number of places, you need to get organised with an itinerary of where you want to make sure that you put forward requests to say, can I go and have a look at that? Perhaps if you can liaise with the council's officer over that during adjournments, etc., so that you can take that forward. And at some point, if that means I'm going to be going from places to places, if the parties can put in place the means of getting messages as to what time I'm going to be where, so that we avoid unnecessary delay. Okay, right. In terms of the running of the day, we will start at 10. We are going to finish by 5 o'clock. We'll take lunch normally around about 1 o'clock. Today it will be whenever it best suits proceedings. There will be short breaks in the mornings and the afternoons, and I will be very much guided by advocates as to when you think it's best for those breaks to take place. If I appear to have forgotten that we need a break, it's fine to remind me. Okay, so getting down to the business, we are here for this appeal, and the main issues that were identified at the case management conference were, firstly, the risk of a fire event and whether in the event of a fire the proposed fire safety and pollution control measures would be sufficient to prevent pollution of aquifers and control the quality of groundwater, with particular regard to the health and safety of local residents, and the effects of the proposal upon the character and appearance of the local area, including the Dorset National Landscape. Is that right? Okay. We will deal with other matters as well, though I've noted that they include representations about alternative sites and grid connection issues, and I've already raised the BATs. Has anyone got any comments on the main issues, or can we move on? No? Okay, fine. Right then, so that concludes my opening remarks now. So just for the benefit of the public, we are now going to go to the opening statements from the advocates for the parties, and then we will then hear your submissions to the inquiry. Now, do we want a short break now before opening statements, or yeah, should we take 10 minutes now? So can we be back at 5 past, do we think? So we're just all going to take a quick comfort break. We will be back at 5 past to start with the opening statements. Thank you, everybody. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is 11:05. Looks like members of the public. Someone just pop out and see if they're able to come back in. Okay, let's get ready to get going again. Have you agreed any different order with the council's position? Miss Osmond-Smith, you're going first, then the council, then the action group. Marvellous. Right. Okay, so if we're already at the back, I would now like to ask Miss Osmond-Smith to make her opening statement for the appellant. Thank you.
So, Madam, you've got two documents, the opening statement and the comments on your queries that sits behind that. Can I just check everyone can hear me? Yeah, good. Okay, I'll begin. Achieving clean power is now a broader goal, key to a growing economy, our national security, and improving our standards of living. We should be in a hurry to achieve it. So writes Chris Stark, Head of Clean Power 2030, in his foreword to the Clean Power Action Plan. He continues, Britain has seen some of the world's greatest clean energy resources, but we have planning and consenting processes that are far too slow to build the infrastructure needed to exploit them. That must change. In respect of battery storage, the Clean Power Action Plan notes that the opportunity is huge, as battery storage is scalable and could be relatively quick to deploy. Its deployment could not only cut bills for consumers, but minimise the amount of more costly generation and associated infrastructure that needs to be built whilst maintaining security of supply. At the time of the Action Plan's publication, there was just 4.5 gigawatts of installed battery storage capacity. To deliver clean power by 2030, the government estimates that some 27 gigawatts will be required, the majority of which is expected to come from grid-scale batteries. The action plan identifies improving the time it takes for mature grid-scale batteries to obtain grid connections and planning decisions as being crucial to increasing capacity. The appeal scheme has a grid connection secured in the event that planning permission is granted, so if the appeal is allowed, it could contribute towards the government's 2030 target. This is the context in which the appeal should be viewed. It is an appeal which need not have happened. The Council recommended Clearstone Energy Limited's planning application for approval. The committee report identified the main benefits as being around reduction in carbon dioxide emissions powering the grid and therefore helping lessen climate change, reducing energy prices for consumers and reducing reliance on less secure form of energy generation. Officers recognised that these were all significant benefits and carry significant weight in the planning balance. Councillors ultimately disagreed with the advice of their professional officers and voted to refuse the planning application, providing just one reason for refusal, which is that it has not been demonstrated that the proposed development would not, in case of a fire, result in pollution of aquifers and/or watercourses within an area where local residents are reliant on the use of aquifers. The Council subsequently changed its position and no longer seeks to contest the appeal. It will adduce no evidence and will not test the appellant's case. Had this position been adopted at the time the planning application was considered, the appeal scheme could already be on the way towards delivering clean power. It is highly material that the Council offers no objection to the scheme and considers that planning permission should be granted for the proposal. The appeal will proceed with evidence from the Action Group, the Rule 6 party, and the appellant. The appellant will adduce evidence on each of the two main issues that were identified for the appeal, Madam, and which you've recited this morning. The appellant's case is that the risk of a fire and adverse effects would be low, and measures would be in place to prevent the risk of pollution and contamination. Whilst there would be some limited landscape harm, this would be significantly and demonstrably outweighed by the significant benefits that the appeal scheme would deliver. Accordingly, the appellant will in due course invite you, Madam, to allow the appeal. Turning first of all to the need for the appeal scheme, the appellant's planning evidence will be given by Mr. Bradshaw. He will say that there is a well-documented national need for battery storage to ensure the country's legally binding climate targets can be met, taken from key government policies to achieve net zero by 2050 and to improve energy security and reduce household bills. The framework sets out explicitly that applicants should not be required to demonstrate the overall need for projects such as this. Mr. Bradshaw points to the recognised need for battery storage as set out in the action plan. Importantly, he emphasises that the capacity range should not be interpreted as a specific target or a cap to capacity, as the need will continue to grow beyond 2030. That there is a well-established need for projects such as the appeal scheme, and that this need is clearly set out in government policy, cannot therefore be in dispute. Indeed, such need has recently been recognised at another appeal for a similar scheme, where the inspector concluded it was highly evident that there is a demonstrable unmet need for the appeal proposal, and this is, we say, equally applicable to the appeal scheme. One of the key benefits of the appeal scheme is that it has a guaranteed Gate 2 grid connection if planning permission is granted. Furthermore, its target grid connection and operational date of 2028 is in contrast to the many energy projects in the UK, which cannot commence operations before 2030. This is because, unlike with the appeal scheme, they require network operators to undertake substation expansion works and/or reinforcement works before they can connect to the network. In addition, the appeal scheme is the only BESS project that can now connect to Axminster substation between 26 and 2030. This is highly significant in the context of the government's Clean Power 2030 mission and a significant material benefit that the appeal scheme would deliver. For the purpose of this appeal, the adopted development plan is the East Devon Local Plan 2013 to 2031. Mr. Bradshaw identifies the following local plan strategies and policies as the most relevant to this appeal. That's Strategy 3 on sustainable development, Strategy 7, development in the countryside, Strategy 39, which is renewable and low carbon projects, Strategy 46 concerns landscape conservation and enhancement and AOMBs, Policy EN14, control of pollution, and finally Policy EN18, maintenance of water quality and quantity. The appellant will adduce evidence as to how these relate to the appeal scheme, and Mr. Bradshaw provides an analysis within his own evidence. Importantly, he will say that he considers the appeal scheme accords with the relevant policies of the development plan and with the development plan when read as a whole. Turning then to the main issues on landscape, the appellant's landscape evidence will be given by Ms. Fletcher. She did not undertake the landscape and visual appraisal that accompanied the planning application, but broadly agrees with its methodological approach and findings. Importantly, she notes that both the Council's landscape officer and the Dorset National Landscape Partnerships officer concluded that the appeal scheme should not be refused in relation to landscape matters. As she concludes, it can therefore be assumed that the methodological approach to LVA and the broad findings herein are of a quality and robustness appropriate to inform their judgments. Ms. Fletcher will say that in her professional opinion, she considers that there would be a moderate to major effect on the immediate appeal site, the main site for use of the BESS compound, landscape character, but that such effects would be confined to within the field and would be attributed principally to the adverse change from what is currently an open pasture to the appeal scheme. While she concedes that the level of effect would be greater than appraised in the LVA, she notes that her appraisal is consistent with that of the Council's landscape officer. Indeed, this was the conclusion that was set out in the committee report, which stated that while the site would see a significant and adverse change in its character and appearance, these effects would not be experienced beyond the site itself. With regard to the impact on local visual amenity, Ms. Fletcher will say that higher levels of adverse visual effect would be very localised, with viewers further from the appeal site experiencing perceptible, but not fundamental changes in their view. Ms. Fletcher has considered the effect of the appeal scheme on the Dorset national landscape. She will say that the overall findings of her review are consistent with the appraisal of effects in the LVA, which identified moderate to negligible effects. Ms Fletcher considers that the moderate adverse effects are a cautious prediction, which partly results from an acceptance of the relatively high sensitivity of the Dorset national landscape, reflective, of course, of its national designation. Overall, she concludes that whilst the appeal scheme would result in a noticeable change to the local landscape, it would not result in transformative change to the landscape character, and the highest level of visual effects would be localised. On the Dorset national landscape, she notes that the northern edge, which is potentially affected by the appeal scheme, has a lower susceptibility to the proposed changes, and that the largely rural landscape character of this area would remain largely intact. In his evidence, Mr Bradshaw undertakes an analysis of the appeal scheme's conformity with Strategy 46, Landscape Conservation Enhancement, and AONBs of the local plan. Mr Bradshaw will say that in his professional view, when considering Strategy 46 in its entirety, the scheme is in compliance. Accordingly, Mr Bradshaw attributes limited adverse weight to landscape harm. On matters of battery and fire safety and pollution control measures, the appellant's evidence on battery and fire safety and pollution will follow the source pathway receptor model. Mr Blunden, dealing with battery and fire safety, and Mr Reynolds, dealing with fire water runoff, focus on the source. Mr Rigby, hydrological, and Mr Lester, airborne, cover potential pathways, and Mr Fellows focuses on receptors, looking at the potential impacts on local water supplies. As an overarching point, the appellant's witnesses refer to other legislation, standards, codes and guidance which ensure that even in a highly conservative scenario, any contaminated water would be managed under established regulatory regimes. The framework states that the focus of planning decisions should be on whether proposed development is an acceptable use of land, rather than the control of processes or emissions, and should assume that these regimes will operate effectively. That is the basis upon which the appeal should proceed. Mr Blunden's evidence will focus on battery fire safety. He will say that fires at sites such as the appeal scheme are rare and typically well contained. In 2025, 10 fires were reported at such sites across the world. Mr Blunden notes that whilst this number was up from 8 in 24, it was based on a 70% increase in installed capacity. Mr Blunden calculates the annual fire probability at the appeal scheme as one event in 102 years for the first 2 years, and then one event in 397 years thereafter. Based on this evidence, Mr Bradshaw says that he considers a fire to be an unlikely event. Mr Blunden will explain how the appeal scheme complies with the National Fire Chiefs Council grid-scale battery energy storage system planning guidance. And importantly, the Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service reviewed the appeal scheme against its guidance and local firefighting capabilities and raised no objection to it. In accordance with the NFCC guidance, a specific manufacturer and technology has been selected for the appeal scheme, and that's the Wärtsilä Quantum 1. Mr Blunden will give evidence of its compliance with the product safety standards specified in the NFCC guidance, concluding that in his professional opinion it meets or exceeds all required product safety standards, including proposed separation distances. Mr Blunden explains that the appellant's outline emergency response plan was produced by a former Deputy Chief Fire Officer at DSFRS who could be expected to have a good working knowledge of their operational procedures and capabilities in the area. He will say that the ERP is a credible, comprehensive and aligned to the FRS national operational guidance and international best practice. On emergency water supplies, Mr Blunden's evidence is that the provision of 228,000 litres meets the guidance, and again notes that the fire service has not objected to it. Mr Blunden will explain that to further test the safety credentials of the appeal scheme, he reviewed it against the standards contained in the latest NFPA 855/2026 code, which is the most rigorous and comprehensive best safety regime that could be applied. Importantly, he will say that in his professional opinion, the appeal scheme meets or exceeds all of the standards contained within it. In the event that a fire did break out, Mr Blunden will say that the tactics that would be used by firefighters would be defensive rather than offensive, employing a controlled burn strategy that allows the affected battery container to burn whilst protecting the surrounding area and infrastructure. He will say that the appellant has complied with the NFCC guidance for on-site water provision and site-specific risk information. Finally, Mr Blunden will give evidence on the large-scale fire test that Wartsila has undertaken, which he describes as one of the most comprehensive and extreme fire safety validation programmes conducted by the energy industry to date. He concludes that the Wartsila Quantum 1 behaves exceptionally well in fire. Mr Reynolds' evidence will complement that of Mr Blunden, focusing specifically on the release of firewater from the appeal site. Having reviewed the Wartsila test results, he is confident that fire would be limited in scale and relatively short-lived. With regard to firewater contamination risks, Mr Reynolds explains the importance of differentiating between boundary cooling water and direct fire suppression water. Boundary cooling water is used in defensive firefighting strategy applied to adjacent non-burning containers and surrounding structures to prevent spread through heat transfer. Mr Reynolds confirms that as it does not come into contact with burning battery materials, electrolytes or thermal runaway byproducts, it remains chemically equivalent to ordinary water supply and poses minimal contamination risk. By contrast, direct fire suppression water does become contaminated if applied to actively burning battery systems and will likely require specialised containment, testing and disposal procedures. Mr Reynolds will give evidence of what can be learned from other fires at best schemes, noting that the evidence from the Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service Carnegie Road fire in September 2020 was that water contamination was minimal. Similarly, the operator at the site at Tilbury, where a fire broke out in February 25, has confirmed that the firewater was not contaminated. Mr Reynolds will say that this is consistent with international studies which have not supported the contention of widespread contamination risks. Importantly, his own analysis of these international studies against UK regulations suggests that the water samples would meet the UK surface water and or drinking water standards. Mr Reynolds explains how the Carnegie Road fire highlights important differences between older technology and more modern container design, such as the one proposed to be used at the appeal scheme. Furthermore, he explains that the design will minimise the volume of water required for boundary cooling and hence the risk of uncontrolled fire water runoff. Key to this is the proposed fire alarm system, which Mr Reynolds believes would lead to the efficient application of water and minimise the risk of uncontrolled firewater runoff. Mr Reynolds will say that it is highly unlikely that firewater will be contaminated if a defensive firefighting strategy was adopted, but that on-site containment provides a solution to enable water to be tested for contamination during and after a fire event. Mr Reynolds and Mr Rigby will explain how this would be achieved on the appeal site. Overall, Mr Reynolds confirms that the design would provide for the effective containment of firewater on site. Turning to pathway, the appellant has two witnesses who will give evidence on pathway. Mr Lester's evidence will focus on the potential risks and impacts from emissions to air arising from the appeal scheme in the event of fire. He will explain that likely emissions generated by a fire would include hydrogen fluoride, ammonia, formaldehyde, carbon monoxide, methane, hydrogen chloride, and hydrogen cyanide, in addition to particulate matter. Whilst the Rule 6 party has raised specific concerns about PFAS, the limited data that exists suggests that the amount of PFAS emissions released would be very small and therefore not a viable source. Mr Lester will say there is a viable pathway to the nearest human receptor and a viable pathway for surface contamination. However, for the reasons explained by Mr Fellows, there is not expected to be a viable pathway to groundwater and/or aquifers. Mr Lester notes that the plume assessment studies submitted as part of the appellant's planning application assessed the pollutants with the greatest potential for human health impacts and assumed worst-case emissions. He described the assumed emission rate for particulate matter as an overly pessimistic assumption. Mr Lester notes that the plume assessment study did not consider the possible effects of woodland and hedges, which even in winter would act as physical barriers, helping to reduce the concentration of any plume reaching receptors. Furthermore, the model set up used the worst-case wind directions to the nearest receptor, assuming any plume would be travelling directly from the appeal site to the receptor. Whilst Mr Lester does find that a different model setup might have given more pessimistic results by extending the distances at which effects might occur, he concludes that any potential under-prediction in this regard is more than offset by the use of pessimistic worst-case emissions elsewhere. Overall, Mr Lester will say that the plume assessment study assumes emissions that are worst case for very short-term impacts and which represent beyond worst case for the timescales relevant to pollution limits. Mr Lester considers that the scenarios assessed capture reasonable worst-case conditions for a fire at the appeal site and that the appellant has given more than adequate consideration to the risks. He will say he considers the risk of harm by surface contamination to represent a negligible risk. Based on Mr Fellowes' evidence, Mr Lester considers there is no realistic risk of harm to aquifers from a fire at the appeal scheme. Mr Rigby will also give evidence for the appellant on pathway, focusing on whether a credible pathway exists from a firefighting water source to controlled water receptors, and if so, whether the pathway is broken by design. If the pathway is not credible or is broken by design, the alleged pollution mechanism cannot reasonably occur. Mr Rigby will say that the baseline conditions of the appeal site mean runoff is not diffuse or uncontrolled, but is deliberately intercepted, routed and stored within engineered features. Importantly, this means that any incident water will enter a managed system with defined hydraulic controls rather than dispersing across the site or directly entering receiving rivers. Mr Rigby explains that infiltration testing of soil permeability demonstrates that there is low permeability on the appeal site, which will not readily allow infiltration. This is important for two reasons. It supports the decision to adopt aligned, non-infiltrating drainage strategy and indicates that even under a conservative hypothetical scenario in which contaminated water made contact with exposed ground outside of these features, the rate of downward migration would be slow and would provide sufficient time for interception, recovery and remedial action. Furthermore, the shallow groundwater on the appeal site does not form a continuous saturated layer that would provide an easy pathway for lateral or vertical containment transport, which is consistent with the infiltration tests. Mr Rigby will say that this reduces the plausibility of an immediate and widespread groundwater pathway forming in response to a short duration firewater incident. Taken together, Mr Rigby concludes that the baseline drainage layout, low near surface permeability and variable shallow groundwater conditions establish that even before considering engineered mitigation, the site does not present a naturally efficient pathway for rapid transport of surface-derived contaminants to groundwater. On the engineered pathway breaks, Mr Rigby will explain the key features of the surface water management proposals, which are designed to break the pathway to controlled waters. The storage provision has sufficient capacity for a firewater volume of 228 metres cubed, based on a conservative firefighting approach of 1900 litres per minute for a 2-hour period, and this aligns with the NFCC guidance and is supported by reasonable worst-case modelling. Mr Rigby will explain that by not relying on a single storage element, the design provides resilience and reduces reliance on any single component. 2 penstock isolation points have been incorporated, which are intended to be closed in the event of a fire incident to prevent discharge of potentially contaminated water. This creates a closed, isolated system within the site boundary, and the valves would be programmed to close automatically in response to a fire event at the appeal site. In pathway terms, this represents an active engineered barrier that directly interrupts the surface water pathway between the source and the receptor. In addition to the penstock valves, the system has also been designed to control vertical migration by incorporating impermeable membranes beneath the granular drainage blanket, swales and attenuation basin, which would be capable of resisting the chemical concentrations and temperatures that could arise during a fire event. Mr Rigby notes that from a pathway perspective, the impermeable lining provides a robust break in the vertical pathway to groundwater, independent of whether penstocks are closed promptly or storage volumes are approached. Mr Rigby will explain that the drainage system has substantial inherent storage capacity. When the penstocks close during a fire event, the system becomes a closed containment system. The modelling tests that system against a concurrent rainfall event of a 2-year, 48-hour storm with 45% climate change, which he will say is a reasonable worst-case event. Under those conditions, Mr Rigby will confirm that the modelling demonstrates that the system contains both the firewater volume and the concurrent rainfall with zero flow reaching the downstream network. He concludes that taking the baseline site conditions, the engineered containment and isolation measures, and the recovery provisions together, there is not a complete and credible pollutant linkage from the proposed development to controlled waters. Mr Fellows will give evidence on behalf of the appellant on the receptor. He has reviewed the controlled waters environmental risk assessment that the appellant submitted with its planning application, and he confirms that it follows the staged risk-based approach which is recommended by Environment Agency guidance, and that it is generally in accordance with good practice guidance. Mr Fellows relies on Mr Blunden's evidence that the risk of a fire at the appeal site would be low, and that the infiltration testing, which suggests the likelihood of contaminated water leaching through the overlying soils to groundwater, is also demonstrably low. Using data on the typical hydraulic conductivities of clays, Mr Fellows concludes that leaching or migration through the overlying clay would not occur over appreciable time periods and not before remediation could take place after a fire incident. Mr Fellows further relies on the evidence of Mr Reynolds that the contaminants that could be present in firefighting water runoff are not likely to be at concentrations in the firewater that would result in pollution of groundwater. Importantly, he will say that in his professional opinion, and in the context of constituents in firefighting water runoff, the site geology, the low potential for transport of contaminants in soil, means that a severe classification pollution incident is not foreseeable on the basis of the development design and is thus a negligible risk. He concludes that the probability of an adverse event is very unlikely, and thus the risk from contamination is acceptably low. Drawing all of that together, Mr Bradshaw assesses the appeal scheme against Strategy 39 and policies EN14 and EN18 of the local plan. He concludes that all requirements set out in Strategy 39 would be met. As set out in the preamble to Strategy 39, significant weight should therefore be given to the clean energy benefits of it. Policy EN14 stipulates that planning permission will not be granted for development which would result in unacceptable levels of harm relating to 7 matters, including pollution of the atmosphere, pollution of surface or underground waters. Mr Bradshaw will say that this can be complied with through the imposition of conditions controlling the submission and approval of various plans and strategies. Policy EN18 requires applicants to take appropriate measures to safeguard the quality and quantity of surface and groundwater. Mr Bradshaw will say that this would be met through the various measures, including in the appellant's drainage strategy. As such, Mr Bradshaw concludes that the appeal scheme complies with the development plan policies cited in the Council's reason for refusal. He considers matters covered in the first main issue to be neutral in the planning balance. On benefits, Mr Bradshaw will give evidence that the appeal scheme would deliver the following: the contribution to a national need for energy storage, which he gives substantial weight; the contribution to energy security, that is reducing the UK's reliance on foreign energy imports by increasing levels of domestically produced renewable energy, which he gives significant weight; the fact that the appeal scheme has a guaranteed Gate 2 connection if planning permission is granted, and a target grid connection and operational date of 28, which he gives significant weight. BNG and landscape enhancements, they get limited positive weight. Economic benefits, including the generation of jobs and ongoing investment in linked skills and services in the energy infrastructure sector, also limited positive weight. The contribution to meeting an identified local need in the form of the Council's declaration of a climate emergency in 2019 and the Climate Strategy and Action Plan, which is currently under review, also gets limited weight. In the overall planning balance, Mr Bradshaw will say that the only identified harm is to landscape character and visual amenity, to which he attributes limited adverse weight. There are several neutral factors: hydrology, contamination, fire risk and battery safety, residential amenity and noise, and highways. As set out above, Mr Bradshaw considers the appeal scheme accords with the relevant policies of the development plan and the development plan as a whole. Importantly, However, he concludes that even if conflict was identified, such conflict needs to be weighed in the planning balance against all material considerations. He will say that the impacts of the appeal scheme would be clearly and demonstrably outweighed by the benefits. Accordingly, Madam, even if you do identify a conflict with the development plan, planning permission should still be granted. So for those reasons, we will invite you in due course to grant planning permission subject to appropriate conditions. Madam, then turning to your queries, the first of those was about the test data documents that we've touched on briefly already, and you invited submissions on whether or not the requirements of section 321 of the Act were met, and we set that out at paragraph 1 of our note. And I say this, that the core requirement of section 3212 in respect of documentary evidence is therefore that it shall be open to public inspection. There would not appear to be any specific provision made as to how such public inspection is to be facilitated. On that basis, the appellant considers that having hard copies of documents available at the inquiry for members of the public to view fulfills the requirements of that section, as they are therefore open to public inspection. To ensure those not present at the inquiry are aware that the documents available to be inspected in person, they have been included on the core documents list, and a note has been added to let people know that they can be viewed at the inquiry. The next query was about the Grenfell inquiry and what was said there about the manufacturers or manufacturers' commission tests and assessments of safety being relied on as guarantees of safety of operation in real life conditions. And what I say about that is this, that the Grenfell inquiry phase 2 report found that a very significant reason why the tower came to be clad in combustible materials was systematic dishonesty on the part of those who made and sold the rain screen cladding panels and insulation products, noting that they had engaged in deliberate and sustained strategies to manipulate the testing process, misrepresent test data, and mislead the market. The report found that these strategies succeeded, partly because the certification bodies that provided assurance to the market of the quality and characteristics of the products failed to ensure that the statements in their product certificates were accurate and based on test evidence. One of the recommendations for the role of a new construction regulator was to maintain a publicly available library of test data and publications with specific regard to the certification of products and test data. The report stated that manufacturers make many claims for their products, some of which are not of an overly technical nature but are calculated to give the impression that a particular product has passed a particular test or has been shown to be suitable for a particular use. And manufacturers were able to use misleading marketing material in part because the certification bodies that provided assurance to the market of the quality and characteristics of the products failed to ensure that the statements in the certificates they issued were accurate and based on appropriate and relevant test evidence. So in regard to certificates of conformity, the report recommended that copies of all test results supporting any certificate issued by the construction regulator be included in the certificate, that manufacturers be required to provide the construction regulator with the full testing history of the product or material to which the certificates relate, and inform the regulator of any material circumstances that may affect its performance, and the manufacturers be required by law to provide on request copies of all test results that support claims about fire performance made for their products. The appellant has made the results of the test that it seeks to rely on available, Madam, to you, the Rule 6 party, and copies are available for members of the public to inspect in person. I should add the council, of course, to that list. They are available for other parties to view and inspect, and it's important to note that the material provided is not marketing material, but test reports compiled by an independent third party, that is the Fire and Risk Alliance, in accordance with the relevant test method, which is the UL 9540A. The appellant's witnesses will give evidence on their interpretation of the test results. By way of example, Mr. Reynolds' conclusions are based on his analysis of the material, which he says conforms with his own view of what he would expect to have seen. In addition, he will say that the results corroborate other research that he has referenced and relied upon. As such, Mr. Reynolds is not taking the results at face value. He is using them as one source among several to inform his professional views. On that basis, the appellant invites you, Madam, to place reliance on the test data and the appellant's evidence of its expert witnesses, part of which is their analysis and interpretation of the test results. The Rule 6 parties' expert witnesses are also, of course, going to give their own evidence on the interpretation of those test results. The final question is about the fear of harm and whether or not that is material as part of your determination in these proceedings. And I say this, that the fears of residents have been held to be capable of being a material consideration in the determination of planning applications and, of course, planning appeals. The cases which have established this proposition are primarily based on fears concerning anticipated antisocial behaviour and crime, which have been held to be concerns that relate to land use considerations. In the West Midlands case, and I give the citation there, and of course we can make a transcript available, Madam, to you if that would be of assistance. The Court of Appeal, per Lord Justice Pill, reviewed the relevant authorities before setting out the following propositions that emerged from them. The first is that the impact of a proposed development upon the use of and activities upon neighbouring land may be a material consideration. Second, in considering the impact, regard may be had to the use to which the neighbouring land is put. And finally, justified public concern in the locality about emanations from land as a result of its proposed development may be a material consideration. The Court of Appeal therefore held that public concerns need to be justified to constitute a material consideration. One of the cases cited in the West Midlands case related to a clinical waste incinerator, where there were public concerns over noxious substances from the proposed plant. In that case, Lord Justice Glidewell held that while public concern was a material consideration, if it was not justified, it cannot be conclusive. In a later case in which the fear related to the erection of a radio telephone base system, the Court of Appeal, per Lord Justice Shyman, held that objectively unjustified fears could in some circumstances be a legitimate factor to be taken into account, noting that the weight to be given to this would be, in principle, a matter for the decision taker. In this case, the Health and Safety Executive had provided comments to the local planning authority. In the High Court, the claimant had submitted that the local planning authority had wrongly thought it was bound by those views rather than having an obligation to exercise its own judgment. The court stated, per Mr. Justice Carmath, as he then was, that whilst the ultimate decision was for the local planning authority, it was right that on a technical issue such as this, that great weight should be given to the advice of the expert bodies which had statutory responsibilities. For a recent example of how these propositions have been applied in the context of an appeal under Section 78 of the Town and Country Planning Act, we list there, together with its reference, a case at Stafford Education and Enterprise Park, which was an appeal by Serco Limited against the refusal of its application for a change of use from student accommodation to asylum seeker accommodation. Among the main issues were the effect that the proposed development would have on the fear of crime. The parties agreed that the fear of crime was capable of being a material consideration, but did not agree on whether it should be in that case. The inspector treated it as a material consideration, but did not set out the reasons for this, as it did not alter the outcome. The inspector held that the fear of crime and actual crime attract no more than limited weight, principally because there was limited evidence to support the case being made. While the inspector recognised that local people held genuine, strong concerns over how the proposed development might affect crime, there was no compelling evidence that criminal activity is more prevalent or extreme among asylum seekers than among the wider population, and nor had it been demonstrated that those living at the appeal site would pose a significantly greater threat compared to the current situation in terms of potential criminal activity. Accordingly, while recognising that these fears are real, the inspector concluded that based on the information before me, they do not appear to be well-founded. The inspector also took into account the lack of compelling evidence of criminal behaviour among asylum seekers currently living in the area, and the fact that police had not raised a wider objection to the proposed development. The inspector differentiated the application from another appeal decision on the basis that there appeared to have been clear evidence of existing crime and antisocial behaviour in another decision. For those reasons, the inspector stated that the effect of the proposed development on fear of crime and on crime could attract no more than limited weight. So drawing all those points together, it can be said that the fears of residents are capable of constituting a material consideration in the determination of planning applications if based on land use considerations. The general requirement is for fears to be objectively justified. This will be the case even if the fears are real and there are genuine strong concerns. Where such fears are not objectively justified, they may still be capable of being material considerations in certain circumstances, but the weight they are afforded will likely be significantly reduced. And factors that a decision maker should take into account include the evidence before the decision maker and whether it suggests that fears are well-founded or objectively justified. Wider factors such as the evidence of existing issues and comments from those with technical expertise or statutory responsibilities. Applying that to the present case, the appellant accepts that the fears of residents are capable of being material as they relate to a land use consideration. However, they will need to be shown to be objectively justified and well-founded. This will be the case, madam, even if you conclude that they are genuine and real. It is the appellant's case that based on the evidence it will adduce from its expert witnesses, the test data and the evidence from similar schemes, the fears are not objectively justified or well-founded. And madam, should you find the fears of residents are a material consideration, Mr. Bradshaw, I am instructed, will give evidence on the weight to be given to them and will say, due to the lack of evidence to justify the fears, that this is something that should be given only limited weight in the planning balance. Madam, unless I can assist you any further, those are my opening remarks.
Thank you very much.
Madam, there should be a copy of the opening. I think the appeal officer put it on your desk at the start of the day. And I think it's the same, yes, I think it's the same for everybody else as well. So the advocates for the other parties should also have a copy. On the front page, I just set out the information as much as anyone for me, so I remember where I am and what I'm doing. So I turn to page 2, which is the start of the introduction. Paragraph 1, the council contends that the appeal should be allowed and planning permission granted for the proposed construction, operation and maintenance of a battery energy storage system with associated infrastructure and works, including highway access, landscaping and biodiversity enhancement at the appeal site, in accordance with the terms of the application and the plan submitted with it, subject to appropriately worded conditions. This reflects a change in position from that which was set out at the Case Management Conference in January 2026. However, the Council's present position aligns with the Council's professional officer's earlier recommendation to grant planning permission, as made to the Planning Committee in May 2025. This opening statement will do 2 things. First, it will seek to summarise the procedural background to assist the Inspector and members of the public in understanding why the Council now takes the position that it does. Second, this opening statement will outline the Council's position on appeal with reference to each of the main issues identified by the Inspector at the Case Management Conference. So turning to the procedural background, the Council's officers recommended that planning permission be granted for the appeal scheme, subject to conditions, for the reasons set out in the committee report, and I provide the core document references in square brackets. At a planning committee meeting of the 13th of May 2025, it was resolved, contrary to officer recommendation, to refuse planning permission for a sole reason, which my learned friend has previously read out. A decision notice was duly issued on the 14th of May 2025. The Council proceeded to prepare a statement of case based on members' position and appointed witnesses to present the Council's case on appeal, as recorded in the post-CMC note. An initial statement of common ground was agreed with the appellant. However, as canvassed at the Case Management Conference, the appellant and the local authority proposed to agree a revised overarching statement of common ground and a topic statement of common ground by the 6th of February 2026. Following the Case Management Conference, which took place on the 14th of January 2026, the Council proactively sought to narrow issues with the appellant. The change in position followed a review of the Council's case as part of sensible ongoing case management. Following a review by its appointed expert, and Madam, you'll remember we referred to him at the CMC, it's Mr. Mark Hamill, I want to provide his qualifications there. The Council reported to members that Mr. Hamill had advised that the site is carefully designed to capture firefighting water runoff. This significantly reduces risks posed to the site. The likelihood of drinking waters being contaminated is unlikely, and that the severity of contamination in such an event would be low and short-lived and would not pose lasting impacts. In those circumstances, the Council sought to no longer defend its sole reason for refusal. The decision to withdraw was informed by officer and independent expert advice and was authorised by the Planning Committee in accordance with the Council's constitution. The decision was also communicated to the appellant, Rule 6 party and the Planning Inspectorate promptly and prior to the exchange of proofs of evidence. On the 12th of February 2026, the Council agreed a further statement of common ground with the appellant. This updated statement of common ground supersedes the earlier document, as we've discussed earlier this morning. And the updated statement of common ground recorded that the Council had withdrawn its sole reason for refusal and therefore no matters in dispute with the appellant remain. The Council is in agreement with the appellant that the planning permission should be granted for the development. Obviously, matters remain an issue between the appellant and the Rule 6 party. The inspector will still need to reach a decision pursuant to Section 70 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 and Section 38(6) of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. The effect of the agreement between the appellant and the Council for the purposes of these appeal proceedings is that the Council does not intend to advance a positive case in respect of the appeal, does not intend to defend its earlier reason for refusal, and does not challenge the appellant's evidence presented on appeal. In practical terms, the Council's involvement in these proceedings will be limited to supporting the administration of the appeal proceedings and appropriately to contributing to the conditions session. The development plan, Madam, I then set out the planning policy context. I don't propose to rehearse that. We've got a lot to get through. And then I turn to the main issue, which I summarise in bold, paragraph 18 over leaf on page 5. In relation to fire safety and pollution matters, Devon and Somerset Fire and Rescue Service did not object to the application. The Environment Agency did not comment on the application. The lead local flood authority did not object to the application. The following matters of agreement, among others between the Council and the appellant in the Statement of Common Ground, are emphasised. The appeal scheme was designed in accordance with the latest best guidance. The probability of a best fire on the site is low. A best fire on the site is very unlikely to affect more than one best unit. The appellant provided proportionate and sufficient risk assessments within their planning submission to enable a planning decision to be made in line with policy and guidance. The site is not located in a source protection zone or a designated drinking water safeguard zone. The site is in an area designated as of low groundwater vulnerability. The underlying bedrock is designated as a principal aquifer. There are properties in the local area that rely on the aquifer for private water supplies, though no private abstraction points have been identified. The risk of contamination of local water supplies is acceptably low. The Council has no evidence to counter the appellant's best fire plume assessment study, which concluded that there would be no impact due to toxic gas or visibility impairment on any receptor in the proximity of the Axminster BESS site due to a worst case battery fire unit. The risk of adverse impacts on soil quality in the event of a fire is acceptably low. Superficial geology underlying the site and surrounding area is not naturally conducive to rapid infiltration, supporting the design decision to adopt a lined, non-infiltrating drainage strategy. In the low likelihood event of a BESS fire, it is unlikely that airborne emissions will be produced in quantities sufficient to cause long-term pollution of groundwater. The submitted drainage system is designed to attenuate in a 100-year rainfall event, plus climate change in normal operation. In the low likelihood event of a BESS fire, it is improbable that such an event will have an unacceptable adverse impact in terms of the potential contamination of the aquifer, and it's appropriate to secure the submission of updated risk assessments within a battery safety management plan and emergency response plan via the imposition of a planning condition. In those circumstances, the Council considers that the policies identified in the sole reason for refusal are complied with, and as such, main issue 1 as between the appellant and the Council is resolved. On main issue 2, which concerns the character and appearance of the local area, including the Dorset National Landscape, the Council's decision notice did not contain any landscape reason for refusal. Although the site would see an adverse change in its character and appearance, the Council agrees that the landscape effects of the appeal scheme are considered acceptable in accordance with Strategy 46 of the local plan. The Council has not advanced a case against the appeal scheme on main issue 2, and that was the same as at the case management conference. In terms of other issues, the statement of common ground agreed between the appellant and the Council addresses other issues at the appropriate references. It's agreed that the appeal site does not comprise best and most versatile agricultural land and does not cause harm to heritage assets, does not result in an unacceptable harm to protected species or biodiversity, subject to conditions, causes no adverse impacts to the local highway network or highway safety, and the appeal scheme does not require a planning obligation. The approval of detailing relation to decommissioning of the appeal site can be dealt with appropriately via planning conditions. In terms of the benefits of the appeal scheme, the Council's office has previously recognised the benefits associated with the appeal scheme. In summary terms, the appeal scheme would make a contribution to the national need for energy storage, a contribution to energy security, would deliver economic benefits, biodiversity net gain and landscape enhancements. The appellant's evidence is that the appeal scheme is a guaranteed gate to grid connection should planning permission be granted. The Council accepts that the delivery and the timing of the appeal scheme is capable of being a material consideration weighing in favour of the appeal scheme. The above factors weigh in favour of the grant of planning permission in this case. I address the planning balance at paragraph 25 onwards. The determination must be made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. The Council agrees with the appellant that the appeal scheme complies with the development plan read as a whole. Material considerations, including national policy and the public benefits associated with the appeal scheme, further point towards the grant of planning permission. The benefits of the development outweigh any identified harm that would arise, as advised by the Council's officers previously. For those reasons, the appeal should be allowed and planning permission granted in accordance with the terms of the application and the plan submitted with it, subject to appropriately worded conditions. Madam, in relation to those points that you raised in email, the first point in relation to the public documents, I'm not going to get involved in the debate between the Rule 6 party and the appellant. Safe to note that the requirements in 321 subsection 2 are that documentary evidence be open to public inspection. Obviously, there are documents available in the room. You need to be satisfied that that is sufficient for the purpose of the provision. In terms of the manufacturer's tests, again, I'm not going to step in on that point. On the third point, in relation to whether public concern can be a material consideration, well-founded public concern, such as a justified fear of crime or antisocial behaviour, has been held to be capable of being a material consideration. That's the West Midlands Probation Committee case. It was referred to it's been referred to since in a variety of contexts, including it was referred to in the first instance in the Epping Forest and Samani Hotels judgment. Sorry. I'm trying to talk to two people at once, hang on. So essentially on the material considerations point, a well-founded public concern such as a justified fear of crime or antisocial behaviour arising from a proposed development is capable of being a material consideration. We see that in the West Midlands Probation Committee case. Analogously, a well-founded public concern about safety arising from a proposed development is capable of being a material consideration. What, if any, weight should be afforded to that consideration is a matter for the decision maker. The main parties will obviously be able to make submissions on the evidence in due course as to whether any concerns are well-founded. And so, unless I can help you further, that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. I just have one question. Can you guide me to the core document for the report referred to at paragraph 11?
No, because it's not been provided as a core document. It was internal advice provided by Mr. Hamill to the council. If it would assist, he's been involved in the agreement of the statement of common ground, so that position is reflected in the statement of common ground.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
Thank you, Madam. The Rule 6 party resists this appeal in the strongest terms. The proposal for a BESS is manifestly unsuitable on this sensitive site, above an aquifer and near to sensitive surface watercourses, where the very real risks of fire at the development could lead to contaminated firewater and hazardous airborne emissions, polluting the private water supplies which serve the residents of Hawkchurch and its neighbouring communities. This is not the first time that a BESS proposal in this area has come before an inspector. In February 2024, an appeal was dismissed for a BESS at Pound Road, Hawkchurch. The Rule 6 party, through its predecessor group, the Hawkchurch Action Group, acted as the Rule 6 party at that inquiry and calls many of the same expert witnesses at this inquiry, including Professor Ramsden on battery safety and Clive Carpenter on hydrology. Whilst, of course, each case must be judged on its own merits, the Pound Road decision does establish that even where the probability of a fire event is low, the sensitivity of the receptors in this location demands the most careful scrutiny of whether contamination of the aquifer and watercourses can be prevented. That's because the consequences of failure here are potentially catastrophic. There are multiple private water supplies within the catchment of the site, at least 10 to 15 of which are close to the anticipated overland flow route and within 1.5 kilometres of the site. The consequence of contaminants arriving at these groundwater sources are very serious, given that residents will be drinking, cooking and bathing in the groundwaters that they abstract and use. Further, the risk of a thermal runaway event on this site over its 40-year lifetime is also very real and cannot be discounted. There have been a number of large fires at BESS sites across the world. The Carnegie Road fire in Liverpool in 2020 resulted in the fire and rescue service being on site for 59 hours. There were 3 fires at BESS sites in the UK in 2025 alone, at East Tilbury, Roffey Norman and Cirencester. At the heart of the appellant's safety case lies a single critical assumption, that a fire at this development would be confined to one battery unit, and that its 10 centimetre spacing with the adjacent unit, less than the length of an iPhone, is sufficient to prevent its spread. This is said to be justified by the large-scale fire tests carried out by the manufacturer, Wärtsilä. Every element of the appellant's case then proceeds from the assumption that the worst-case fire event would be a fire limited to one unit. This is the basis for the calculation of the volume of firewater, the plume impact study, the assessment of likely contaminants and their quantity, and the proposed firefighting strategy. If there's a realistic risk that fire would propagate beyond a single unit, even to one adjacent unit, the entire evidential basis for the appeal collapses. The large-scale fire tests are at the centre of the house of cards that we say the appellant has constructed. However, the Rule 6 evidence will demonstrate that the large-scale fire tests do not provide the assurance that the appellant claims. The tests were conducted by the manufacturer's selected consultants, and 2 tests on 2 different products, carried out under controlled conditions for limited periods, cannot replicate the full range of variables that will be encountered over the 40-year operational life of a BESS facility. The parallels with the concerns raised in the Grenfell inquiry about the reliability of product testing commissioned by manufacturers then being used as a guarantee of real-life safety are, we say, directly relevant to the weight that could be placed on the test results. That's particularly the case here because, as Professor Ramsden will explain, the conditions under which the tests were carried out departed from real-world operating conditions in a number of material respects. Further, the tests do not, by design, test the safety measures proposed to be deployed in the event of thermal runaway or the interaction between those systems. They also assume that the starting point for a BESS fire is a unit which is physically intact. As Professor Ramsden will explain, that assumption is flawed. Accordingly, the 10 centimetre separation between units in a string and the 3.2 metre separation with the next string has not been adequately justified in accordance with the updated NFCC guidance. However, even if the appellant is right that the fire is contained to one unit, it has, we say, severely underestimated the consequences that would follow, even on this best case scenario. In that event, the likely strategy to be deployed by the fire service would be boundary cooling the adjacent by 10 centimetre units. The appellant suggests that boundary cooling water would not be able to interact with the contents of that unit due to its sealed construction. This defies common sense and is also inconsistent with the position of the Fire Service, the Environment Agency, and also the photos from the large-scale fire test, which provide little comfort that this would be the case, and I've included in a couple of photos below. Any water that would come in contact with the batteries inside the unit would be very likely to be contaminated. As Professor Ramsden explains, the chemical composition of batteries is a toxic cocktail of chemicals, including lithium hexafluorophosphate, which reacts immediately with water to create the highly toxic and corrosive hydrogen fluoride, copper and aluminium, and potentially carcinogenic dioxins. There are then two distinct pathways by which contamination of the highly sensitive receptors around the site could occur. The first pathway is through the failure of the on-site firewater containment system. The appellant strategy relies on a drainage blanket with an impermeable liner beneath the compound, swales, and an attenuation basin, with automated penstocks designed to close in the event of a fire alarm to prevent off-site discharge. However, as Mr. Carpenter will explain in his evidence, there are very real concerns about the adequacy of this system. The appellant's design assumption is that the volume of containment storage needed for firewater is 228 cubic metres, equivalent to 2.5 hours worth of continuous boundary cooling at the updated NFCC rate. However, not only does this depend on the premise that only one unit will burn, it's also far from being a worst-case assumption in any event for reasons that will be set out by Mr. Carpenter. The incident report into the Liverpool fire states defensible firefighting was required for 59 hours to extinguish and thereafter for cooling. The Pound Road appeal provided for up to 11 hours worth of firewater storage, and that was found to be insufficient. There is a very real risk that the on-site containment system could be overwhelmed and would then discharge into the surrounding environment. In addition, even if water was retained on site, the strategy relies on the proposed impermeable liner working effectively across the lifetime of the development. This is an untested assumption, and notably, the appellant appears to accept that the liner it originally proposed for this purpose would not achieve this. The second pathway is through airborne contamination. A fire at the best would produce an external smoke plume containing, amongst other things, PFAS. If the plume travels off-site, which all evidence suggests it will, these particles will deposit beyond the site boundary and beyond the on-site drainage system, and could also enter into watercourses and groundwater through this route. The appellant's last line of defence is a suggestion that there's no credible pathway for contamination to reach the underlying aquifer, relying on what's said to be the low permeability of the clay with filth deposits above it. This assertion is very much in dispute, and the Rule 6 party does not accept that the clay with filth geology provides the degree of protection contended for by the appellant. However, overall, given the potential consequences, contamination of the drinking water supply relied on by residents, farms and businesses, the Rule 6 party submits that a precautionary approach is required. Even if the probability of a fire is low, the consequences are potentially catastrophic and irreversible, and where those consequences include the pollution of an aquifer upon which a community depends, it's the Rule 6 party's position that this appeal cannot be permitted if there's any realistic prospect of that occurring. Turning next to the impact on landscape character and appearance, the development will clearly have a significant adverse effect on the landscape character of the site. An estimated 228 battery units would be housed within 52 banks of containers, together with 38 inverters and other electrical plant and equipment. There would be an on-site substation compound, and surrounding the battery storage compound would be a 2.4 metre steel palisade security fence, and enclosing 3 sides of the compound would be a 4 metre high acoustic attenuation fence. It is and will be perceived as a major new industrial facility built in the open countryside. Commissioned for a period of 40 years, the harm it will cause will be felt for a generation. The site lies near the Dorset National Landscape, and part of the development falls within the designated landscape itself. Whilst the appellant sought to downgrade the harm to the national landscape, the Rule 6 party endorses the findings of the landscape and visual assessment that there would be a moderate level of harm to the national landscape, harm which must be given great weight, we say, in the overall planning balance. Turning then to other matters, It's correct to note that neither the council, as you've heard, nor the fire service objects to this proposal. However, there was similarly no objection from the fire service to the Pound Road appeal and also the Wareham Road appeal proposals, both local and both which were found to be unsafe following scrutiny. As for the council, it's recognised that officers recommended approval, as they did at Pound Road, and has taken the decision on advice not to defend this appeal. However, that position and the basis upon which it was taken cannot be scrutinised at this inquiry. If, having heard the evidence, the conclusion is reached that the proposal is not safe, the fact that the council took a different view should not, we say, be given weight. And then I turn to the matters, Madam, that you asked for submissions on. You'll see what I've said in writing on availability of documents. But following the discussion we had earlier, if I just set out where I think we stand now. So in terms of section 321, we agree. The requirement there is that evidence be open to public inspection. There's no requirement for it to be online. What I've pointed to in the written text is what's said in the inquiry's procedure rules, which requires local planning authorities and then also on appeal that to afford any person who requests a reasonable opportunity to inspect and where practical take copies of relevant documents. So the question is, we say whether having documents in hard copy rather than online provides a reasonable opportunity for people to access them. The concerns that I raised earlier, that people might have difficulty coming here, seeing the document, we do have those concerns, but they are academic concerns at the moment. Nobody has said to the council or anyone, I want to see these documents and I can't. So in those circumstances, we would suggest that we proceed as we are. If somebody does say, I want to see the documents, I can't get to the council chamber, then we can deal with that as and when it comes. But that's, I think, where we stand at the moment. And I'm grateful for the clarity in terms of the ability to refer to documents. We'd understood the concern was commercial sensitivity rather than intellectual property. If it's intellectual property, then there's no issue in that respect. So that's where we're at. I don't think there's a dispute between us, but we'll see where we get to. The approach to testing I've dealt with. Fear on harm, I'll read out what I've said. Perception of harm is capable of being a material consideration. However, the Rule 6 party does not invite you to give it material weight as a standalone consideration. If those concerns are not justified, it's difficult to see how they could amount to a legitimate reason for refusing planning permission. In this case, for the reasons set out above, the concerns are very justified, and it's on that basis that the Rule 6 party contends that the appeal should be dismissed. So again, I think there's common ground on that as well. I haven't set out all the case law, but I think we've reached the same place, that as a standalone consideration, yes, it's capable of being material, but neither of us are asking for you to give it any more than limited, if any, weight, if you find that the appeal scheme is safe. So then in terms of the conclusion, the Rule 6 party's case is that the proposed development would cause harm of a weight and magnitude that ultimately outweighs the benefits of the scheme. We recognise and acknowledge that battery energy storage systems can play a role in supporting the transition to net zero. We consider that the need case here is more nuanced than suggested by the appellant, given current BESS capacity in the pipeline and the appellant's grid connection status. However, those benefits, however great, cannot outweigh the harm caused by a development that's not safe, and they're benefits that can be realised on sites that do not give rise to the risk of harm here. In short, if the development cannot be shown to be safe, then the appeal must be dismissed, in line with the approach taken by the inspector at the nearby Pound Road and Wareham Road sites. And for those reasons, in due course, we will be inviting you to dismiss the appeal.
Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we've now heard all of the opening statements. Just to clarify, so that we're under no confusion, we will proceed with how we have agreed with the hard copies of CD 9.2 in the room. I think it's a very practical and very constructive suggestion that we will keep ourselves alert to if there are any issues arising from the accessibility. I understand that the room is publicly accessible every day that the inquiry is sitting. So the documents are here. And I think the room is available until 6 o'clock on an evening. And I have said that I will be closing the inquiry at 5 o'clock. Similarly, on the morning, I have said I'm opening at 10. And I think the room is available from 9, which is when the council officers, as I understand it, open. So there is time for people to have a look at the document outside of the sitting time of the inquiry as well. But I'll leave it now with the parties to bring any issues to my attention if we need to as we go through the days. Okay, so on that matter, that concludes all of the opening statements, and we are now ready to hear from the interested parties. So, let me just remind myself.
Madam, while you do that, can I ask, on the documents that have been handed up, are you giving them specific references?
Sorry, just to butt in there, in terms of the opening statements, I think the appeal officer has already added a list of them as 19.1, 19.2, 19.3, which I know is not orthodox. We can turn them into inquiry documents if that's preferable.
Yes, please. Can we have, I should have said this earlier, so thank you. Can we make sure that in the core document library we've got a subsection for inquiry documents? And then I'm happy to leave that with the appeals officer to list them numerically. Does that assist you?
Yes, I suppose practically my opening statement was comprised of 2 parts. So that could be 1A and 1B.
Yes.
And then the councils would be next at 2. And then Rule 6 party at 3. And then I wonder, in respect of the photo that was handed in today, if we call that 4?
Yes, it was. Okay, are we okay to go to the interested parties now? So, from my notes, Dr. Goldman, are you going to speak? Marvellous. So when you come, just for the benefit of us all, please remind us who you are and who you speak for before you start, please. Thank you.
Thank you. As you'll see, I'm reading, but I've also changed this a little this morning. So I'm very happy to commit to providing you with a corrected copy tomorrow, if that's okay, if that helps you to listen rather than having to note. So thank you very much for letting me speak. I'm a member of the public. I'm a local resident. I have no particular expertise. I have, however, read all of the appellant's expert reports. I was surprised to find that it's a fundamental assumption underpinning all the reports that a fire is contained to a single container. I wasn't surprised to find that there's no mitigation vis-à-vis the plume. Having read the reports, I recognise myself referred to in at least one. So, putting a face to a name, I am a human receptor. I would have preferred the more honest person susceptible to being poisoned in the event of a best fire, but let's take it for what it is. All of my neighbours and I are human receptors. That's because the appellant has decided to place its BESS on top of the aquifer which we take our drinking water from. Taking our drinking water from the aquifer is not a choice. There is no main supply alternative. A key concern about this BESS is contamination of the aquifer, most likely, but not necessarily, associated with the BESS fire. The message that runs through the appellant's case seems to be that there is a low probability of an event and a low probability of contamination, that land will be contaminated, but the ground percolates slowly, so we'll probably clean it up before there's a problem. There doesn't seem to be a recognition that a low probability event can have a high risk outcome, and that's what we face. Of course, as residents, our concern is not just about this BESS. The volume of applications made to build BESS in our area suggests that if this BESS is approved, there'll be other approvals. It's a matter of weeks before the next BESS inquiry. That is for a similar size facility on a neighbouring site. So for us, if this BESS were to be approved, every risk that's considered in this inquiry is likely to be soon doubled and then tripled and so on. Who knows? Still, it seems that the appellant's view is that the probability is low and the locals, the human receptors, should just suck it up and get on with life. Sadly, even if a BESS fire is non-polluting, we can't just get on with life. And here's why. If there is a fire at Hazelhurst BESS, we need to be informed. I see nothing in the appellant's plans which indicate how it will ensure that all who drink from the aquifer will be informed. In fact, the appellant has shown no interest in knowing who we are. It's only the work of the Rule 6 party which has established that more than 100 homes, households, farms and businesses take drinking water from the aquifer. Of course, if there is a failure to inform and there is pollution, plenty of people, plenty of human receptors are drinking that polluted water. If we are informed, then what do we do next? Prudence suggests that we should refrain from drinking the water until it's proven to be safe. How long will that take, and how do we get drinking water in the meantime? People with private water supplies are required to test their water at least annually. Those tests cost around £500 each. However, these water quality tests fail to look for or identify many of the pollutants that may be found in the aquifer after a BESS fire. So far, I've been unable to find any provider of tests to the public which will pick up those pollutants. So how do we establish that our water is safe? If we can find someone to test, over what period do we need to keep testing the water to be sure that the water is safe? Let's imagine that we find a test and it costs £1,000 per test and 3 tests per supply are all that are needed. For some households, that will be £3,000 that they haven't got. Even if it's only 100 households and businesses that are affected, that's a cost of £300,000 to the community, even when it's later proven that there is no pollution. And of course, all those people need to find a supply of potable water until the aquifer is proven safe. I can't find anyone who's obliged to provide that water. We are not customers of the local water company, so there is no supply interruption which it is obliged to make good. Again, the cost of that water supply is hard to assess. But at commercial rates, for households only, and again only for 3 months, a cost of £3,000 per household looks likely. So that's another £300,000 minimum of cost imposed on the community. Possibly more like 1 million in total when the much higher water consumption rates of farms and businesses are factored in. All that cost, disruption, uncertainty, stress, and inconvenience pushed onto the local community just because at the inception, the appellant cared not to understand that there are sensitive waters under this site. And of course, you don't need to tell me, you don't need me to make clear how much greater the cost will be because of businesses that fail, homes that are not viable, and so on, if the aquifer is actually polluted. There can be no doubt that the community's cost could be many millions of pounds. And of course, in a polluting incident, it's not just locals who are at risk, but also anyone who eats or drinks at one of the bars, restaurants, or hotels which rely on private supplies. Anyone who eats lamb, which grazes on surrounding fields, and anyone who drinks supermarket milk. I suspect that's pretty much everybody in this room. As residents, if there's one thing that we understand about our local area, it's how water behaves. Heavy rain is a feature here, and we live with its effects all year round. Springs are abundant, and every year brings new ones. For sure, there are places where flint and clay is on the surface, but meters away you can find exposed green sand. We have uphill bogs, again because of ribbons of green sand that are exposed on the surface. In summer, even in this last extremely dry summer, springs and field drainage continue to flow when fields are brown. We also have self-draining fields next to fields that flood. The geology here is complicated for sure, but any suggestion that water does not drain into the aquifer or mix with spring water simply does not align with lived experience. To us, since day one, it has felt like the prevailing attitude of the appellant to the risks associated with sitting the BESS on top of the aquifer is something like indifference. The plans that are just pulled together to try and obtain approval have the whiff of minimum necessary rather than a desire to work collaboratively and properly ameliorate the risk. Where that seems to leave us is that if this BESS is approved, the operator needs to be lucky. Lucky that there is no fire. Lucky that if there is a fire, all of its automated alert and control systems work perfectly. Lucky that our local but remote fire and rescue service arrives in time to contain the fire to one cabinet. Lucky that whatever the position on site, the local fire service commander opts only to apply cooling to the cabinet. Lucky that the amount of water that the fire commander decides to use does not exceed the site's storage capacity, and probably therefore also lucky that it's not raining particularly heavy that day. That's an awful lot of luck every day for 40 years. As local residents, human receptors, we need to be unlucky only once. And if we are, there is risk to life, livelihoods, and livestock. It's hard to see how this can be justified when there are so many other potential BESS sites, when we don't need to take this risk, and when by the government's own measure, the amount of BESS capacity approved, under construction, and in operation right now accounts for over 170% of the national capacity requirement which the Appellant's Council referred to in relation to 2030. I urge you, please, do not let the appellant's desire to sell this site at a profit override the basic human need to be confident of a clean water supply for a period of more than 40 years. I have the figures which evidence the 170% number that I referred to. It comes from a parliamentary briefing paper, and I'll attach a reference to that and an extract when I share the print of this speech. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Just a second, please. Okay, just a reminder, can you introduce yourself again before you start, please?
So I'm Joanna Gordon, and I live next door to the site. We live very close to the proposed site and get our water via gravity from a well located just to the northwest of it. We bought New Park 23 years ago from a vibrant lady of 96 who attributed her health and longevity to the well water. It was a costly exercise updating the infrastructure to secure our water supply, but we had no choice. We are a long way from the mains, and a connection was prohibitive. The aquifer has never dried up in all the years we've been here, and its contamination would be disastrous for us, the livestock, and the abundant wildlife and flora New Park supports. Our fields and woods, which begin 200 metres from the site, are fed by streams which fill the water troughs and run down to the valley, eventually joining the River Axe. The land is very wet, characterised by reeds and bogs, with springs surfacing all over during wet weather. The neighbouring farms are similarly dependent on the aquifer for their water, as are scores of other properties. Contamination of the aquifer with forever chemicals and heavy metals from a BESS fire would represent a catastrophic act of ecological vandalism. We all depend on this water. New Park is part of a government scheme to enhance biodiversity called Countryside Stewardship. We are in higher tier stewardship, which has very strict rules about what you're allowed to put on the land and what use the land can be put to. This industrial installation directly conflicts with these endeavours, with its potential for enormous harm to the natural habitat. Pollinators such as bees, butterflies and dragonflies would certainly be adversely affected by the noise of construction machinery, and the constant drone of coolers would disorientate them, adversely affecting navigation and reproduction. New Park also has an ancient woodland within this scheme, considered to be of significant ecological value. At night, it is full of the sound of owls hooting. We are also home to the colony of rare lesser and greater horseshoe bats you referred to earlier. They cohabit our house and are managed by the Vincent Wildlife Trust. The proposed site falls well within their range for foraging, flight paths and social behaviour. The developers failed to do due diligence on the suitability of the site for bat habitation, ignoring the bat survey guidelines and data requirements for impact assessment. There are several Schedule 1 bird species at New Park, including barn owls, falcons, hobbies, and a particularly sensitive bird which enjoys special protection and which we are not allowed to name. The construction phase alone would be enough to frighten off this elusive predator. New Park is a haven for wildlife, especially predators such as foxes, badgers, and birds of prey. This is indicative of a healthy ecosystem. We have also got healthy field and dormice populations, numerous frogs, lizards, and toads, as well as sika, roe, and muntjac deer. These developers put all of this at risk for their own financial gain. It has been an anxious few years since learning of these BESS proposals and their true potential for harm. There has been a constant barrage of proposals which, when refused through local efforts, are then appealed by developers with endless resources. Research shows they are backed by huge conglomerates, and their expenses are certainly offset against enormous profits, whilst our expenses are funded by local people out of their net income and, in some cases, their pensions. Not an endless resource, not offsettable against profits, not refundable, and with no foreseeable end to the proposal, refusal, appeal cycle. The emotional and financial burden on all of us has been enormous. I hope and pray we prevail and we can put an end to this interminable menace. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Are you happy for me to start? Sure, sorry, thank you.
The council, when we have a break, the predator that cannot be named, could you have a word with the lady who just spoke, and can you just check through your documents over the ecological considerations at the time of the application, etc., just to make sure that the predator that can't be named has appropriately been covered if necessary. Is that okay? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Ali Watson, and I'm a resident of Dorset rather than Devon. But my property is close to the proposed site for the development of the battery system and would be affected by it were it to be built. The public inquiry will address the risks of a catastrophe associated with a failure of the technology, including the growing evidence that such failures are a feature of lithium battery storage rather than a bug. I do not intend, therefore, to cover any of that ground. What I do want to say is that although this matter has been raised to Devon Planning Authority, the site in question is directly on the county border with Dorset. The toxic plume from a fire at the battery site would affect Devon residents if the breeze were onshore, but it would be us Dorset folk who would be affected by the contaminants if the winds are blowing offshore from the north. More generally, I want to provide some context for the dangers of this development from the Dorset perspective. The site is on one side of the street. On the other is open farmland that falls away into the Char Valley, a rural setting of family farms that has been unspoilt for centuries. When Lord Bridport was forced to sell the valley and the tenanted farms in the late 19th century, the cottages, farms and buildings throughout the valley were documented in detail. That detail has remained virtually unaltered to this day. The valley is designated as an area of outstanding natural beauty, or as I believe it is now designated, part of Dorset National Landscape. The valley is topped by two ancient Iron Age forts preserved by the National Trust, the Charmouth Forest and the village of Whitchurch Canon in Corham, whose church has been and still is a destination for pilgrimage, and in whose graveyard many historical figures have been laid to rest. However, the valley is characterised by sheep and beef and dairy farms, leading down all the way from the proposed site to the Jurassic Coast, a World Heritage Site. Why is this important? The residents on the Dorset side of the road were not officially made aware of the development. Only a few of us found out through word of mouth, and your list of comments does not potentially reflect the feelings, objections, and concerns of many people who would be directly affected by the site. Particularly the issue of the aquifer would be a disaster for our side of the county border. The aquifer underneath the development site bubbles up in springs some 200 feet below the top of the valley and feeds the farms and cottages throughout the valley. Almost exclusively, all of these properties, including my property in Monkton Wild, are on private water supplies fed from the aquifer. The aquifer also feeds multiple streams that eventually flow to form the Char River that passes through the seaside town of Charmouth into the sea. It might seem an interesting academic debate whether a fire will occur, whether it can be moderated, whether there will be an escape of water. In practice, however, any mistake would pollute the Char Valley beyond remediation, ending centuries of farming and village life and impacting an important town on the Jurassic Coast. The decision on this appeal seems easy to me because the development seems so inappropriate in the setting and the potential consequences so grave. I hope you feel the same. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm Karen Goman. I'm reading three statements, one short one from me, but first of all, statements from other residents. The first one is also in Monkton Wild on the Dorset side, from Dave and Sophie Burley of Forest Farm. This is their statement. We live at Forest Farm, approximately 350 metres southeast of the proposed site. We object strongly to this project because of the danger it poses to the green sand aquifer below the topsoil and to the surface and groundwater that feeds the streams. Our family have lived in this area for 130 years. The water supply here has been constant and reliable. There's no mains water supply for most of Monkton Well parish. We all depend on the aquifer. At Forest Farm, we have a main spring that feeds our household and our livestock. The livestock also drink from the many other springs and the whole Batch Brook that runs through our land. Our farm and our neighbours' farms and woodland have exceptional biodiversity and wildlife and have been designated an ecological network by Dorset Wildlife Trust and the Dorset National Landscape. Any contamination to the aquifer during a battery fire would pollute our water supply, the supply to the whole parish, the prized natural environment with toxic heavy metals and forever chemicals permanently. The applicant claims that the probability of a fire is low. However, the disastrous consequences of a battery fire would make any risk unacceptable. This for-profit enterprise endangers our lives, our health, our livestock, and therefore our business, and the health and biodiversity of this beautiful landscape. It would turn productive agricultural land into an industrial zone. Now, I'm now going to read another statement by a resident of Blackpool Corner, just very near the Bess, Caroline Jameson. She's flagged up the regular upslope fogs that are all along the Crooken Road round the Blackpool Corner, and they're actually called Raymond's Hill fogs. She's particularly concerned about, obviously, the risk of fire and the release of hydrogen fluoride gas, which dissolves in water to make hydrofluoric acid, which is extremely toxic. Caroline states, we live at Blackpool Corner, roughly 250 metres from where the best site would be. The whole area is often in cloud, upslope fog to give its proper name, known locally as Raymond's Hill fog. Cloud and fog are droplets of water. I'm truly concerned that hydrofluoric acid is extremely corrosive. Even at low concentrations, it causes severe and immediate lung damage. It can affect your sight, causing corrosion of the eyes. It can also lead to long-term health problems, such as bone damage, and it may even be fatal. We may have to be evacuated at short notice, and by then, possibly, it would be too late, as hydrogen fluoride gas is very difficult to detect. I have that uncertainty of not knowing when the best is going to go up in flames. It will be like living for 40 years or more in a chemical weapons war zone. So that's Caroline Jameson's very understandable anxiety and the emotional effect it's had on her just to have been living with this proposal for the 2 years in which it's been around. So I'm just going to now read my own brief statement. I live at Corshey Springs, where we have multiple permanent springs by our house and on our fields. They have never dried up, even in periods of drought that we have experienced over the 21 years we've been here. The springs come from deep down. They're first seen as oozings on the earth, and within feet, they develop rapid streams which swell with surface water and rainwater. One of the springs is piped and permanently spouts water next to our house. Our sheep and other wildlife drink from all the springs and streams on our land. Our tranquil area, our rural area, is rich in wildlife and unspoilt by development. There are few roads. That's one of the reasons a lot of people move here. No developer would propose a factory here. Yet here we are again, once again, fighting a developer's appeal for a dangerous industrial site and on 5 acres of pasture, which would be permanently destroyed. The noise alone, continuous noise from the battery coolers, would decimate wildlife and remove all amenity and enjoyment of the whole area for people. Thank you.
Everyone who's just spoken, who's read from notes, if you would like to give them to the council's officer, then they can be scanned and added to the inquiry documents. You're going to send them in when you get home, is it? Just when we break at lunchtime, just have a chat with the council's officer, and whatever, they'll sort it out with you. And sorry, can I just ask another a favour, please? Because someone shut the door at the back, because unfortunately I'm looking at silhouettes of people talking to me, which is not very nice. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, please.
Ready, okay. I'm Mo Dodson. I'm speaking on behalf of Hockchurch Parish Council. The proposed site for this development is on the boundary of Hockchurch Parish and is situated over the same aquifer that supplies water to the natural ecosystems and many homes and farms across the area. Hockchurch as a parish has already contributed substantially to renewable energy targets with its more than 100 acres of solar panels. This proposal is for a standalone BESS connected only to the national grid, not to the solar panel installations in the area. In developing our neighbourhood plan, the Parish Council has carried out a survey of parishioners' views on a wide range of issues. The survey showed that in total, 98% of respondents agreed with the Parish Council's view that any lithium-based large-scale battery storage installations are unsafe and unsuitable for location within the parish. Lithium energy storage installations are extremely complex, fragile systems requiring extremely precise monitoring and control, not only to run them, but also to prevent catastrophic accidents. These monitoring and control systems are operated remotely with digital technology. A single failure of any of the hundreds of thousands of complex operations and machine components can trigger a thermal runaway fire. The probability of human error is also very real, and the possibility of cyber attacks on the digital systems of monitoring and control cannot be discounted. The Parish Council views this proposal as a very high risk to the aquifer that supports the parish's natural ecosystems and many of its homes, farms, and therefore is an existential threat to the parish as a whole. The Parish Council also sees this type of development as creeping industrialization. The Parish Council would also point to the catastrophic impact on landscape and biodiversity that contamination of the aquifer would result in. The Parish Council therefore contend that the appellant's proposal is not in accordance with multiple strategies and policies of the local plan and therefore should be refused. Thank you.
Madam. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm Councillor Paul Hayward. So for the avoidance of doubt, I'm not speaking on behalf of Axminster Town Council, my employer, although they are aware that I am here and have given me time off to attend in my other capacity. Again, for the avoidance of for the purposes of clarity, I previously sat on the East Devon District Council Planning Committee. I'm not a member of that committee now, and I am a member of the East Devon District Council Strategic Planning Committee that forms the policies that come into our local plan. I also sit in my other roles on the Devon County Council and Devon and Torbay Combined County Authority Audit Committee, dealing with risk management across those authorities on a daily basis. The 3 points I'd like to make, mindful of your guidance on not repeating what others have said, is within the document that was presented, which by Mr. Barber, which was the opening statement. There's just some matters there I just wish to raise. Item B, it says the probability of a BESS fire on the site is low. That's, again, an opinion, but we've acknowledged the impact is high. So, again, that's one of the cardinal things you look at in risk assessments. A BESS fire on the site is very unlikely to affect more than one BESS unit.
Again, from my own view, I believe that's opinion rather than a fact. Item I, the risk of contamination of local water supplies is acceptably low. The terminology there I find a little, not offensive, but I think acceptable low to whom? Perhaps not the people who use the water. And then item J, the council has no evidence to counter the appellant's best flume, fire plume assessment, which concluded there would be no impact. Now, for me, that means none at all. Well, there would be an impact. If there's a cloud of toxic smoke and water is falling through it, there will be an impact. And I'm not going to, wax lyrical about the impact on who. It could be on wildlife, it could be on the soil, it could be on aquifers, it could be on neighbours, but there will be an impact. So it's a falsehood to say there's no impact. I've sat on this committee, essentially we're talking about always harm versus benefit. That's drilled into planning committee members. Harm versus benefit. It's the cardinal rule. And the benefit of this scheme, and I work with others, we all use electricity. There is a need for renewable electricity. That is a given. That's why we have a policy on it. But this benefit of this scheme could be acquired if this scheme was on a trading estate in Slough or in a brownfield site anywhere in this district. It's simply here because of what else is here. And other speakers have commented that once one scheme is permitted, it will open the floodgates for others because that's just the nature of planning. There is always precedent. So the benefit could be acquired anywhere, but the harm is localised to this area. And that also brings me on to the landscape issues. That's been alluded to by the Party 6 representative, that there will be a landscape effect. There will be harm because you're introducing industrial process into a rural environment. Hawkchurch has already done, in my own opinion, its fair share to push forward Britain's push to renewable energy. It was a quintessentially rural countryside parish, and now it is pretty much covered in solar panels. That has happened. That doesn't mean we need to take the next step forward. And the final point I'd like to raise just about fire element, and the Party 6 representative covered it. We're currently having a consultation in this area on closing another fire station. Charmouth Fire Station is up for consultation on closing it. Charmouth provides half the cover, that's in Dorset, but half of its activity is covering fire events and incidents in Devon. Now, Axminster Fire Station is a retained fire station. Those are very, very brave volunteers who all give up their time to fight fires. They're not professional firefighters. They have other jobs. I worked with a couple of them elsewhere in the past. And what you've described and the appellant describes in the proof that it's safe are these controlled fire tests. Now, they're obviously, that's what they are, they're controlled. They have to be done under strict conditions, they have to be calibrated, and they're done to conform with health and safety standards. Those firefighters putting out those controlled fires were there. They weren't summoned in, they were there ready and waiting. And so what you have here is a rural location. It's not a direct route, it's quite a convoluted route to get to the site. You have the firefighters potentially constrained and used elsewhere because of localised cuts to fire services. And you've got the fact that it could happen at night, that you've got constrained, limited water supplies, and effectively that the fire brigade would not be there instantaneously. There would have to be a period of time. And for anyone who tonight, when you're hearing this is going on a few days, if you want to watch the film Miracle on the Hudson, you'll see a perfect example of how a period has to be built into any test to allow for that human response. It has to happen. It has to be marshalled. Vehicles have to be gathered. Staff have to be put together to come to the site. And all the time that's happening, that fire is burning. And then there is that risk of spreading to other containers. And then as the Party 6 lawyer has said, if you then have 2 containers alight or 2 units alight, effectively everything else falls by the wayside because you run out of water, you have more smoke, more pollution.
more water falling that needs to be contained. And if it happens to be raining, you also have that. And for anyone, you said yourself, madam, the last 8 weeks, we've seen unprecedented rainfall. As a town council employee, I haven't been able to do lots of tasks because there's been too much water, and that has had profound effects on my community. So I am against this. That's been my position all along, and will follow the outcome of this, but that's just my position. Thank you very much, madam.
Thank you, Madam. I'm Councillor Duncan McKinder, and I will provide the officers with a PDF of the notes I'm speaking from, so they'll be approximately what I'm going to say. As I said, I'm Councillor Duncan McKinder, East Devon Councillor for the Yardie ward, which borders the Best development site. I'm not speaking on behalf of the EDDC Planning Committee, of which I'm not a member, nor am I speaking on behalf of EDDC. What I'm trying to do is represent some of the views of the residents in the ward that I represent. I believe the majority of the properties closest to the site are actually in the Yardie ward, and I should note the very many cogent contributions made by residents directly already here via the Hawkchurch Parish Council and the Hawkchurch and Monkton Wild Action Group, the Rule 6 party. The most critical issue is the potential for thermal runaway and subsequent fire, allowing pollutants to cause irreparable and permanent damage to the Greensand aquifer underlying the site. As we've already heard, local residents depend on this aquifer for their water supply and for that of their livestock and their businesses. Additionally, the local natural environment also depends on the aquifer. The proof of evidence submitted by the Rule Party, the Rule 6 party, on the risk to pollution provide a much more authoritative and comprehensive assessment than I could attempt here. However, I find this compelling and causes me to seriously doubt the negligible risk to the aquifer claimed by the appellant. I hope the comments on page 10 of CD 177, the fire safety response, related to hydrofluoric and hydrochloric acid are the result of innocent chemical confusion rather than an attempt to make these significantly dangerous chemicals seem safe. Brushing your teeth with hydrofluoric acid rather than fluoride toothpaste would likely result in a total lack of teeth. These are very different chemical compounds, though containing the same elements of fluorine and chlorine, and as these very dangerous acids, they must be taken extremely seriously. The best manufacturer in the fire service procedures recommending that best fires burn themselves out results in a second vector pollution reaching the surrounding environment via the smoke plume, as we've already heard, which will deposit pollutants onto the surrounding area as the smoke particles either drop out via gravity or are washed out by rain. There will be no way to control where these pollutants will land, and therefore whether they will enter any controlled waters or aquifer cannot be said to be prevented from entering those controlled waters and the aquifer. The appellant states that the water containment system is sized to hold all fire water required, including a local rainstorm at the same time during an incident. However, I can find nothing in the documentation about where and how such polluted firewater would be disposed of after an incident. Such a system should surely be designed and documented in advance, as leaving polluted firewater on site whilst appropriate location and permissions were sought for its disposal is not acceptable. I should note, due to the very large number of documents, I could have missed these details. I note the design provides a positive biodiversity net gain, which is welcome. However, in the event of a fire, any such gains could be wiped out, as the gain only applies when nothing goes wrong. And in fact, we heard from the appellant's opening statement that the hedges around the site would help to remove some of the pollutants from the smoke plume and prevent them reaching the nearest property. So that biodiversity gain in those hedgerows is taking the hit on behalf of local residents. To me, the dangers of this development in this specific location clearly outweigh any gains from energy storage. So I request that this appeal is dismissed. Thank you for your time.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Okay, thank you all very much. So, well done everyone. We've got to 1 o'clock, so I think with that, now is a good time for us to adjourn for lunch, and I'm confident that we can do the landscape roundtable and also have a quick look at the conditions before we finish for 5 o'clock this afternoon. So thank you all very much for assisting in getting us to 1 o'clock. Right, so we're now going to break for lunch. We will be back in the room for a prompt start at 2 o'clock. As we are going to have a round table session, I don't think we need to start moving furniture and everything around. But if witnesses could arrange themselves so it's we're actually got people quite close up, so we can have a more of a discussion than the formal arrangement. Okay, right then. So with no further ado, thank you everybody. We are adjourned until 2 o'clock. Thank you.